75. That is not a round number. It is not a number anyone would choose if they were trying to make something look tidy. 7 is tidy. 10 is tidy. 12 is the number of the tribes, and 40 is the number of the wilderness, and 3 is the number that shows up in every sermon you have ever heard. But 75 is the number you arrive at only by refusing to stop counting. It is the number you reach when you go through the Gospels, line by line, patiently, without skipping the small ones, without brushing past the single-sentence images that everyone treats as throwaway remarks. And you write down every single time Jesus of Nazareth turned a piece of ordinary life sideways and used it to show people something they could not see any other way. A farmer scattering seed, a woman sweeping a floor for a lost coin, a man building a house on sand, a shepherd counting to 99 and then walking out into the dark because the number should have been 100. A wedding, a wineskin, a fig tree, a fishnet, a mustard seed no bigger than the head of a pin. Count them all, the long ones and the short ones, the famous ones and the ones you have read past 100 times without noticing, and you arrive at somewhere around 75. And here is what should stop you cold about that number. 75 separate stories. 75 separate windows. 75 distinct angles of approach into the same reality. If a single one of these was enough to explain the kingdom of God, he would have told one. If 10 were enough, he would have told 10 and stopped. But he did not stop. He kept turning the diamond, kept finding another face of it, kept reaching for another ordinary object off the ground of Galilean life, and holding it up to the light and saying, in effect, this too, this is like it as well, and this, which means the kingdom of God is not a simple thing that requires one clear explanation. It is a vast thing that requires 75, and even 75 does not exhaust it. Here is the second thing that should stop you. Every one of these 75 stories was designed, deliberately, structurally, from the inside out, to break something. Not to decorate a sermon, not to make an abstract idea easier for simple people to swallow. That is what most of us were taught, that parables are earthly stories with heavenly meanings, little illustrations to help the uneducated grasp big theology. That is almost the exact opposite of the truth. Jesus told his disciples plainly that he spoke in parables so that seeing people would not see, and hearing they would not understand. The parables were not simplifications. They were sorting mechanisms. They were traps of grace, built with such precision that they slipped past the guarded front door of a person's convictions and detonated quietly in the back rooms where the real beliefs are kept. A man walked away from a parable agreeing with it, and only later that night realized that the thing he had just agreed with had condemned everything he had built his life on. That is what happened to a lawyer who asked a clever question about neighbors. That is what happened to a room full of religious professionals who nodded along to a story about a vineyard until they realized the wicked tenants in it were them. That is the word to hold on to for the next several hours. Shatter. Because that is what these stories do. They do not adjust your worldview by a few degrees. They break it and hand you back the pieces rearranged into something you would never have assembled on your own. So this is what we are going to do together. We are going to walk through 75 parables of Jesus Christ, every major one and a great many of the small ones that get overlooked. Slowly, in order, with time given to each. We are not going to skim. We are not going to give you a list of morals. For each one we will look at the story as it was actually told, at the world it was told into, at what the words meant to the people standing there in the dust, and at the specific thing in you that it was built to break. Some of them will comfort you so deeply you will have to stop and breathe. Some of them will make you genuinely uncomfortable, and I am not going to soften those because Jesus did not soften them. Most of them will do both at once, which is the surest sign that you are actually hearing them. By the end of these 75 stories, you will not simply know more about the parables, you will see the world differently. You will look at money differently, at strangers differently, at time differently, at your own record of goodness differently, at the people you have quietly written off differently. That is the promise, and it is not mine. It belongs to the one who told these stories, and he has been keeping it for 2,000 years, in every language, on every continent, in every century, without a single exception. Before we begin, one small thing, and it truly is small. If at any point in the next few hours something here lands in you, would you tap the like button? That is all. Just the thumbs up below the video. It's free, it takes 1 second, and I want to tell you honestly why it matters, because it has nothing to do with numbers on a screen. Somewhere out there right now is a person who is tired in a way they cannot explain to anybody in their life. They are going to open their phone tonight, looking for something, without knowing what, and whether these words find them depends almost entirely on how many people quietly tap that button. Your tap is what carries this to them. It costs you a single second, and it may be the reason a stranger you will never meet hears exactly what they needed to hear tonight. That is the whole ask. Nothing else. And while you are there, do one thing for me in the comments. Not a long thing. Just one word. A single word for whatever you are carrying into this teaching today. The weight you are hoping to set down before we are finished. Fear, debt, grief, waiting, whatever it actually is. One word, no explanation, no performance. You will find, when you scroll, that you are surrounded now. Let us open the word together. Why he spoke this way. The foundation before the 75. Before we touch the first story, we have to understand what a parable actually is, because almost everything most people believe about them is slightly wrong. And being slightly wrong here will cause you to misread all 75. The Greek word is parabole. It comes from two pieces, para, meaning alongside, and ballo, meaning to throw or cast. A parable is something thrown alongside something else. It is a comparison laid down next to a reality so that the reality can be seen. It is not a code to be cracked. It is not an allegory in which every detail secretly stands for something. It is a thing set beside another thing so that the second thing becomes visible. And the reason Jesus needed this method is because of the nature of what he came to announce. He came to announce the kingdom of God, the reign, the rule, the active government of God breaking into human history. But every person listening already had a picture of what that kingdom would be. They had inherited it. It was in their bones. A king like David, an army, Rome broken, Israel restored, the wicked destroyed and the righteous vindicated in a single decisive stroke. And everyone knew who was in which category. That picture was so deeply installed in them that if Jesus had simply said, in plain propositional language, the kingdom is not like that, it is like this, their minds would have rejected it before the sentence finished. Not because they were stupid, because that is how human beings work. We do not evaluate claims that contradict our foundations. We repel them. The mind guards its floor. So he came in the side door. He told a story about a farmer. Everyone relaxes. Everyone knows farmers. Everyone has watched seed thrown on a Galilean hillside and watched some of it disappear into the packed footpath and some of it sprout fast in the thin soil over limestone and die by noon. There is no threat in a story about a farmer. And while the guard was down, while the mind was open and agreeable and enjoying a familiar picture, Jesus set the truth down inside the story like a seed into soil and left it there. And it went to work slowly, over days, over years, growing in the dark of a person's interior, until one morning it broke through the surface and the whole landscape of their life had changed shape. That is why the parables cannot be rushed. They were not designed to be understood in the moment of hearing. They were designed to be planted, which raises the hardest thing Jesus ever said about his own teaching method. When the disciples asked him privately why he spoke to the crowds this way, he answered, "Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given." And then he quoted Isaiah, "By hearing ye shall hear, and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see, and shall not perceive." That sounds on a first reading almost cruel, as though he were deliberately hiding truth from people who wanted it. But look closer at what is actually happening. The parable does not hide truth from the seeker. It hides truth from the tourist. It is perfectly transparent to anyone willing to sit with it, ask about it, follow it home, turn it over at night, come back to Jesus and say, "Explain that one to me." And it is completely opaque to anyone who hears it, finds it charming, and walks away. The parable sorts hearts by what they do next. It does not test intelligence, it tests hunger. The crowd heard a nice story about seeds. The 12 came back and asked, same words, two completely different outcomes, determined entirely by whether the hearer treated the words as entertainment or as an invitation. So understand what you are stepping into now. Every one of these 75 stories is going to do that to you. It will sort you as you listen. And the sorting is not by how much Bible you know, or how long you have believed, or what your history is. It is by one thing only, whether you lean in. Lean in. Let us begin. Movement 1. The parables of the soil and the seed, how the kingdom actually grows. Parable 1. The sower. Matthew 13:3-23. Behold, a sower went forth to sow. Jesus sat in a boat, pushed just off the shore of Galilee, because the crowd on the beach had grown too large to stand among. The water carried his voice back to them. And behind the crowd, up the slope, there would have been terraced fields, the actual working farmland of Galilee. And it is entirely possible that as he spoke, someone was out there doing the very thing he was describing, walking a strip of thin brown earth with a bag at his hip, throwing. The picture is simple. A farmer scatters seed by hand, broadcasting it in wide arcs as he walks, which is how it was done. You did not plant seeds one at a time in neat rows. You flung them across the ground and then plowed them in afterward. And so the seed goes everywhere. Some lands on the hard-packed path that runs through the field, where 1,000 feet have compressed the earth to something like stone, and it simply lies there on the surface until the birds take it. Some lands where a shelf of limestone sits just under a thin skin of soil, and it germinates faster than anywhere else, springing up green and eager, and dies within a day, because there is nowhere for the root to go, and the sun is merciless. Some lands among thorns, old root systems still alive underground waiting, and the seed grows, and the thorns grow with it, and the thorns win, because thorns always win a race for water. And some lands on good ground, and it produces 30, 60, 100-fold. Now here is the first thing that should unsettle you. 3 out of 4 fail. We are so accustomed to this story that we have lost the shock of its arithmetic. Jesus is describing the ministry he is in the middle of conducting, and he is telling his own followers, before they have even started, that the majority of their labor will appear to produce nothing. Most of the seed will not become wheat. This is not pessimism. This is inoculation. He is protecting them from the despair that will otherwise destroy them in 10 years, when they have preached in 100 villages and can point to 12 people who stayed. He is telling them in advance, this is not failure. This is the shape of the work. And if you have ever prayed for someone for 11 years, if you have ever raised a child in the faith and watched them walk away from it, if you have ever poured yourself into a person or a class or a congregation and watched most of it come to nothing, this parable is not scolding you. It is standing beside you, and it is saying that the sower in the story does exactly one thing wrong. Nothing. He sows. The ground does what the ground does. The sower is not judged by the soil, but now turn it, because the parable has a second edge, and the second edge is aimed at you. Jesus explained this one of only a handful he ever explained, and in his explanation, the 4 soils are 4 kinds of hearers. The path is the heart that has been walked on so often it has gone hard. The word lands on the surface, and the enemy takes it before it can sink. The rocky ground is the heart that receives everything with immediate joy and no depth. And when trouble comes, and Jesus says specifically that the trouble comes because of the word, not in spite of it, it withers, because a faith with no root cannot survive weather. The thorns are the heart, where the word is genuinely growing and is slowly, silently strangled by 3 things Jesus names precisely: the cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, and the desire for other things. Not sin, notice, not scandal, cares, money, wanting things, the most respectable killers in the world. And the good ground hears and understands and bears. Here is what shatters. Most of us assume we are the good soil, and that the parable is about other people. But the 4 soils are not 4 different people. They are 4 conditions of ground, and the same field can contain all 4, and so can the same heart, and so can the same heart in different seasons. There are areas in you right now that are packed hard by repetition and disappointment. There are areas that are thin and enthusiastic and rootless. There are areas being quietly choked by worry about money and the desire for other things, and you know exactly which areas those are. And there is good ground in you too. The good news buried in this story is the news that ground can be changed. A path can be broken up, rocks can be dug out, thorns can be pulled. The farmer in Galilee did not stand at the edge of his field and lament its condition. He worked it. And the question this first parable puts to you is not, which soil are you? It is, what are you willing to let God break up in you before the next seed falls? Parable 2, the seed growing secretly. Mark 4:26-29. So is the kingdom of God, as if a man should cast seed into the ground, and should sleep and rise night and day, and the seed should spring and grow up. He knoweth not how. This is the only parable found solely in Mark, and it is 4 verses long, and almost nobody preaches it, and it may be the most quietly liberating thing Jesus ever said about spiritual growth. A man sows, then he goes to bed, and he gets up and lives his life, and he goes to bed again, and gets up again, night and day, and the whole time, underground in the dark, something is happening that he did not cause, and cannot see, and does not understand. Mark's phrasing is beautiful and blunt. He knoweth not how. The earth brings forth fruit of herself. The Greek is automate, from which we get the word automatic. First the blade, then the ear, then the full corn in the ear. Understand what is being said here, because it cuts against nearly everything the modern religious mind assumes. The growth is not driven by the farmer's effort, monitoring, anxiety, or technique. He is not out there at midnight with a lantern pulling on the shoots to encourage them. He sleeps. That is his role in the story. He sleeps, and the kingdom grows. Think of how much of your spiritual exhaustion comes from trying to be the cause of growth in yourself and in the people you love. You measure, you check, you dig the seed up every few days to see how it is coming along, which is the surest way to kill it. You lie awake at 2 in the morning running the numbers on someone's soul. And Jesus says, the earth brings forth fruit of herself. There is a power in the seed of the Word of God that operates independently of your supervision. Notice also the stages, because they matter to anyone who is impatient with their own progress. First, the blade, a green shoot indistinguishable from grass, in which no one could identify wheat. Then the ear, recognizable now, but empty, still filling. Then the full corn in the ear. 3 stages, and the first 2 look like nothing much. If you judge the field at the blade stage, you would say nothing is happening. If you judged it at the ear stage, you would say there is form, but no substance. Only at the end is it obviously what it always was. You may be at the blade stage. You may have been at the blade stage for years and be badly discouraged by it. This parable says the invisible middle is not a sign of failure. It is a stage of the process, and it is the longest one, and the one thing you must not do is dig up the seed to check on it. And then, at the end, the sickle. But when the fruit is brought forth, immediately he putteth in the sickle, because the harvest is come. The harvest is not delayed by a single day when it is ready. God is never late to his own field. Parable 3, the wheat and the tares. Matthew 13, 24, 30, 36, 43. The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. The tare is almost certainly darnel, lolium temulentum, and everything about this parable depends on knowing one fact about it. In its early growth, darnel is visually indistinguishable from wheat, identical. You cannot tell them apart until the heads form, and by then the root systems below the surface have grown together into a single tangled mat, so that pulling one tears out the other. That is the crisis of the story. The servants come to the householder, scandalized, and ask the question every zealous religious heart has asked in every century: "Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? Let us purify the field. Let us go through and rip out everything that does not belong." And the master says, "No, nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest." Sit with how offensive that answer is. The master admits the presence of the enemy's work in his own field. He does not deny it, minimize it, or excuse it. He simply refuses to let his servants conduct the purge. And the reason he gives is not that the tares do not matter. It is that his servants cannot tell the difference without destroying what they are trying to protect. This is one of the most necessary parables in the world right now, and one of the least obeyed. Every generation of the church produces people whose defining passion is the identification and removal of the false. And Jesus, who knows precisely which is which, who has every right to conduct that separation, tells us to leave it alone until harvest, not out of indifference, but out of mercy toward the wheat. Because in the middle stages of growth, you would get it wrong. You would pull out the young believer whose life still looks like the world's. You would pull out the person in the ugly middle of their transformation. You would look at the blade and pronounce judgment on a plant God was 3 seasons away from bringing to full grain. There is a second sentence in this parable that should make you weep, and it is easy to miss. While men slept. The enemy did not break down a gate. He walked in during an unguarded night and worked quietly and left before dawn. This is how the counterfeit always enters, never with announcement, always in the hours when attention lapses. And there is a third thing. Notice the master's diagnosis: an enemy hath done this. When you find corruption in a field that God planted, there is a real explanation for it, and it is not that God is careless. There is an active adversary in this story, and Jesus names him without hesitation. But hold on to the ending, because it is not ambiguous. There is a harvest, there is a separation. The delay is not a cancellation. Everything that offends and everything that works iniquity will be gathered out. And then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. The reason you can afford to be patient with a mixed field is that you are not the one responsible for the sorting, and the one who is has never once failed to do it. Parable 4. The mustard seed. Matthew 13, 31, 32. The kingdom of heaven is like to a grain of mustard seed which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and becometh a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof. There is a proverbial quality in the way Jesus speaks of the mustard seed. In that agricultural world, it functioned as the standard image of the smallest thing imaginable, the way we might say a grain of sand. Rabbis used it as shorthand for a quantity too small to matter, and from that speck, in the right soil in that climate, comes a plant that can rise to 8 or 10 feet in a single season, tall enough and dense enough that birds settle in it. Now understand what this was answering. The people around Jesus were waiting for a kingdom that would arrive the way an empire arrives, visibly, forcefully, with an army and a throne and an unmistakable date on the calendar. And what they were actually looking at was a laborer from an insignificant town in a despised northern province, with a following of fishermen and tax collectors and women of no social standing, in an occupied country on the far edge of the Roman world. It looked like nothing. It looked, frankly, like less than nothing. Any reasonable observer of the year AD 30 would have given the movement 3 years and a footnote. And Jesus says, exactly. That is precisely what the kingdom of God looks like at the beginning. Smallness is not evidence against it. Smallness is the method. This is the parable for everyone who is discouraged by scale, for the church of 19 people in a rented room, for the ministry no one has heard of, for the parent who is discipling one child with no visible result, for the person whose faith right now is not a mountain-moving certainty, but a mustard grain of willingness, barely there, embarrassing to look at. This parable does not say your small thing is fine. It says your small thing contains, by design, a magnitude entirely disproportionate to its appearance, and that the disproportion is the point. God builds this way deliberately so that when the tree stands, no one can credit the seed. And there is that final image, the birds of the air lodging in the branches. That phrase would have rung a bell in Jewish ears. It echoes Ezekiel and Daniel, where great trees sheltering birds represent kingdoms sheltering nations. Jesus is quietly making an enormous claim. This thing that starts smaller than anything will grow large enough for the nations of the earth to come and rest in it. And 2,000 years later, in 180 languages, they have. Parable 5, the leaven. Matthew 13:33. The kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal, till the whole was leavened. If the mustard seed is about size, the leaven is about method. And this parable is stranger than it first appears for 2 reasons. The first is the image itself. Throughout the scriptures, leaven is almost always a picture of corruption spreading. The leaven of the Pharisees, the old leaven purged out at Passover, a little leaven leavening the whole lump. And here Jesus takes that established negative symbol and uses it for the kingdom of God. He is doing something deliberate. He is saying, you have thought about the influence of evil as an unstoppable contamination that spreads through everything it touches. Now think about goodness the same way. The kingdom of God is not a defensive holding operation, it is an infiltration. The second strange detail is the quantity. 3 measures of meal is a specific amount, roughly a bushel, something in the range of 50 pounds of flour, which would produce bread for over 100 people. No woman bakes that for a family dinner. It is a feast-sized batch. Into that enormous mass, she works a lump of leaven that would fit in her palm, and she hides it, and then she does nothing else at all. And in a few hours, every molecule of that 50 pounds has been altered. That is how the kingdom works in a life and in a culture. Not by force applied from the outside, by transformation working from the inside, silently at the level of the ordinary, changing the nature of the substance itself. You do not see it happening. You see the result, and notice where it happens. In a kitchen. Jesus has just used a farmer, and now he uses a woman doing unremarkable domestic work that no historian would ever record. The kingdom advances through hidden, unglamorous, unwitnessed faithfulness in ordinary rooms. If you have ever felt that your life is too small a stage for God to do anything of consequence on, this two-line parable is aimed directly at you. The woman in the story is not named, is not praised, and is not thanked, and the whole lump is leavened. Parable 6, the hidden treasure, Matthew 13:44. The kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure hid in a field, the which when a man hath found he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and buyeth that field. In a land crossed by armies for centuries, with no banking system available to ordinary people, burying valuables in the ground was simply what you did when trouble came. And when the owner died in exile or in war, the treasure stayed where it was, sometimes for generations, waiting under a field that someone else was now ploughing. So a laborer, probably a hired hand working ground that is not his, strikes something with his plough. And in a single instant, the entire economic reality of his life changes. He does not haggle. He does not calculate whether it is worth the trouble. He covers it back over, and he goes and liquidates everything he owns, and he buys the field. Here is the detail everyone races past, for joy thereof. That is the engine of the whole story. He is not making a sacrifice. He would tell you if you asked him that afternoon while he was selling his tools and his house and his cloak, that he was not giving up anything at all. He was making the trade of his life, and he was laughing while he did it. The cost was total, and the cost was nothing, because of what he had seen in that field. This is the parable that exposes the difference between religion and discovery. Religion gives things up dutifully and keeps a ledger of what it surrendered. Discovery sells everything grinning. If following Christ feels to you primarily like a list of things you are no longer allowed to have, you have not yet hit the treasure with your plow, because nobody who has ever actually seen it describes the cost that way. And notice, he was not looking. He was working an ordinary day in a field that was not even his own. Some of you will find what you have been searching for in a place you only wandered into. Parable 7, the pearl of great price. Matthew 13:45-46. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant man seeking goodly pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. This is the twin of the previous parable, and the pairing is deliberate, because the two men could not be more different. The first man stumbled onto treasure by accident while doing manual labor. This man is a professional. He is a merchant in pearls, which in the ancient world were the single most prized luxury commodity on earth, valued above gold. He has spent his life training his eye. He has handled thousands. He knows quality the way a master jeweler knows a diamond at a glance. And he is seeking. He has been on the road, port to port, for years. One found what he was not looking for. One found exactly what he had been looking for his whole life. Both ended in the same place, selling everything. That is the mercy hidden in this pair. Jesus tells the same ending twice, with opposite beginnings, so that no one can say, the kingdom is only for people who were searching, and no one can say, the kingdom only comes to those who never sought it. Whether you have been chasing God for 40 years or ran into him last Tuesday in the middle of a life that was not looking for him at all, the door is the same door. But there is a sharper edge here. The merchant is an expert who discovers that everything else in his inventory is now comparatively worthless. He does not sell his lesser pearls because they were bad. They were good. They were genuinely goodly pearls. He sells them because he has seen one thing that reorders the value of everything he owns. That is what encountering Christ does. It does not make the good things in your life bad, it makes them relative. Your career is not evil, it is now a lesser pearl. Your reputation is not sin, it is a lesser pearl, and a person who has genuinely seen the one pearl does not agonize over the others. Parable 8, the dragnet, Matthew 13:47-50. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind. He's speaking to fishermen. On the shore of the lake they fished, about the specific technique they used. The sardine was not a small cast net. It was a great dragnet, weighted along one edge and floated along the other, walked out into the water and hauled in from the beach, sweeping everything in its path. You did not aim a dragnet. You did not select. It brought in everything the water contained, edible fish and inedible, clean and unclean by Levitical standards, weeds, stones, debris, and the sorting happened afterward on the sand, when men sat down and separated the catch by hand into vessels and refuse. Two things collapse in this image. First, the gospel net is indiscriminate on purpose. It gathers of every kind. Any church, any ministry, any gathering that is genuinely dragging the sea will pull in a mess. People at every stage, people with wrong ideas and hard histories and unresolved lives, people who will not remain. If your net only ever comes up with the sort of people you already approved of, you are not fishing, you are shopping. Second, the sorting happens at the end of the age, and it is not conducted by the fishermen. Jesus says the angels do it. That should relieve you of a burden you were never given and cure you of an ambition you should never have had. And he ends it hard, with furnace and weeping and gnashing of teeth. It is worth noticing how often the tenderest storyteller who ever lived ends a parable with an unblinking statement about judgment. He is not being inconsistent. A man who tells you the harbor is real is not contradicting himself when he tells you the rocks are real too. Parable 9, the householder's treasure. Matthew 13:52. Therefore every scribe which is instructed unto the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which bringeth forth out of his treasure things new and old. This is the last parable of the great chapter of parables, and it is the strangest because it is a parable about people who understand parables. Jesus has just asked the disciples, "Have ye understood all these things?" They say yes, with what one suspects was more confidence than accuracy, and he gives them this. Picture the storeroom of a well-established household. In it are things acquired last month and things that have been in the family for 4 generations. The competent master of that house does not despise either. When a need arises, he goes in and brings out whatever meets it, sometimes the new thing, sometimes the old. Jesus is describing what happens to a person when the kingdom gets into their understanding. They stop being collectors of one kind of thing. The person formed by the kingdom is not the reactionary who insists that nothing good has been thought since the fathers, and not the enthusiast who believes nothing before this decade is worth reading. He has a storeroom, and he has both. And note the word treasure, not archive, not attic. He is not storing junk out of sentiment. Everything in that room is valuable, which means somebody did the work of deciding what to keep. There is a warning folded in here for anyone who has been taught to see the Old Testament as the discarded first draft. The householder brings out things new and old, and Jesus puts new first, but does not put old away. Parable 10, the lamp under a bushel. Mark 4:21-22. Is a candle brought to be put under a bushel or under a bed, and not to be set on a candlestick? The lamp of that world was a small clay dish of olive oil with a floating wick, giving roughly the light of a single candle, barely enough to cross a room by. And the bushel was a grain-measuring basket, an ordinary household object, the natural thing to be sitting on the floor of a one-room Galilean house. Jesus asks a question so obvious that it is almost comic. Does anyone light a lamp in order to put a bucket over it? The absurdity is the argument, but do not miss what he is actually addressing. In Mark, this comes immediately after the private explanation of the sower. In the context of secrecy, mysteries given to some and not others, truth spoken in stories that conceal. And the disciples might reasonably have concluded that the kingdom was a hidden thing, an inner circle, a secret to be guarded. So Jesus says, no, the hiddenness is temporary and purposeful. For there is nothing hid which shall not be manifested, neither was anything kept secret, but that it should come abroad. The concealment exists for the sake of the eventual revealing, and there is a quieter application. A great many believers put a basket over the lamp not out of shame, but out of a strange humility that thinks small light is not worth showing. But in a dark room, one clay lamp changes everything. Nobody in that house needed the sun. They needed the wick that was already lit. Parable 11. The city set on a hill. Matthew 5:14. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on an hill cannot be hid. Look at the geography of what he is saying. Towns in that region were built on high ground for defense, made of pale limestone. And at night, the household lamps burning behind open windows made the whole settlement glow on the ridgeline, visible for miles across the dark valleys. There was no possibility of a hilltop town being discreet. Now hear the grammar, because it changes everything. He does not say, be the light. He says, ye are. It is not a command to generate light. It is a declaration of what has already happened to them, and a statement about consequence. A city on a hill cannot be hid. Not should not, cannot. This is enormously freeing for anyone exhausted by the pressure to be a good witness. The pressure assumes that visibility is something you must manufacture by effort. Jesus says visibility is automatic. If God has genuinely lit something in you, the people around you already see it. Whether or not you ever make a speech about it, your colleagues know, your family knows. Light does not have to advertise, it just has to not be covered, which turns the whole question around. The spiritual work is not, how do I shine harder? It is, what am I holding over it? Parable 12, the salt that loses its savor. Luke 14:34-35. Salt is good, but if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be seasoned? It is neither fit for the land, nor yet for the dunghill. But men cast it out. Salt in the 1st century did 3 jobs. It preserved meat in a world with no refrigeration. It seasoned food, and it was used in tiny quantities on soil and compost. It was so essential that Roman soldiers were partly paid in it, which is where the word salary comes from. Much of the salt available in that region was not the pure product we buy today. It came from evaporation flats around the Dead Sea and was mixed with other minerals. Left exposed to damp, the actual sodium chloride could leach out, leaving a white powder that looked exactly like salt, weighed like salt, and did nothing at all. It was worse than useless. You could not even throw it on the field because it would sterilize the ground. So it went into the street to be trodden underfoot. Jesus says this in the middle of a passage about the cost of discipleship to enormous crowds who were following him enthusiastically. That is the setting. He turns to a great multitude of admirers and describes something that has the full appearance of the real thing and none of its properties. That is a frightening image because it is not about someone who abandons the faith. It is about someone who keeps every outward form and quietly loses the element that made it do anything. The container is unchanged, the savor is gone, and the terrible mercy of the picture is that salt cannot detect its own condition, only the food can. Which means the honest question is not what you believe about yourself, it is whether anything around you is actually being preserved. Parable 13, the 2 builders. Matthew 7:24-27. Whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man which built his house upon a rock. This is how Jesus ends the Sermon on the Mount, not with a summary, but with a story about weather. 2 men build houses. Jesus gives no indication that the houses look different. There is nothing in the parable about one being shabby and one being fine. On a bright day in the dry season, standing in front of them, you could not tell which was which, because the entire difference is underground. One man dug down through the sand of the wadi bed until he hit bedrock and set his foundation there. Expensive, slow, invisible work. The other built on the sand, which in the dry months is flat and firm and perfectly adequate. Then the rains came. In that terrain, the dry riverbeds fill within hours and become torrents. And the storm did not discriminate. Notice that carefully. Identical weather hits both houses. The wise man's house is not spared the flood. It is subjected to exactly the same flood, and it stands. Here is the shattering line. The difference between the two men is not hearing, both heard. Jesus says so explicitly, "Whosoever heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them, and every one that heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them not." Two people can sit under the same teaching for 30 years, take the same notes, feel the same feelings, agree with the same doctrines, and one of them has been digging and one of them has not. Doing is the digging, and the storm is what publishes the difference, not the sermon, not the discussion, the storm. Which means that some of what feels like collapse in your life is really disclosure. And it is far better to discover a sand foundation now, while there is still time to dig. Parable 14, the narrow gate. Matthew 7:13-14. Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. The word translated straight does not mean straight. It means constricted, pressed, narrow, the same route that gives us straits of water between two landmasses. It is a gate that will not admit a crowd and will not admit luggage. Jesus lays out two roads with 4 features each: the gate, the way, the destination, and the traffic. And he is unsparing about the traffic. Many go the broad way, few find the narrow one. We should be honest about how uncomfortable that is. Everything in modern instinct wants to soften it into a metaphor about lifestyle preference, but the picture is a fork, and it does not merge later. What makes the broad road broad? Not that it is wicked in an obvious sense. It is broad because it accommodates everything. You need not decide anything to walk it. You need not surrender anything, examine anything, or narrow anything. It has room for every opinion and every appetite because it makes no demands whatsoever. And that is precisely its appeal and precisely its danger. A road that asks nothing of you is not taking you anywhere you would have chosen to go. And the narrow gate? Notice that Jesus does not say hard to enter. He says few find it. The problem is not that the gate is guarded, it is that it is small enough to walk past, which is why he says, enter, not admire, not discuss. Enter. Parable 15, the mote and the beam. Matthew 7:3-5. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? The mote is a speck, a splinter, a fragment of chaff. The beam is a load-bearing timber, the kind of thing that holds up a roof. And Jesus, who worked wood for most of his adult life, is choosing these two objects with a craftsman's precision. The image is deliberately ridiculous. A man with a structural beam protruding from his own eye socket, leaning in close, squinting, offering to remove a splinter from someone else's. Jesus was funny, and this is one of the places you can hear it. A first-century crowd would have laughed out loud at this picture, and the laugh is the anesthetic that lets the scalpel in. But look at what he does not say. He does not say the speck is imaginary. The brother genuinely has something in his eye, and it genuinely needs removing, and Jesus explicitly authorizes the removal. Then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye. This is not a prohibition on ever addressing anything in anyone. It is a sequencing instruction, and the sequence exists for a practical reason. Eye surgery requires proximity, steadiness, and clear sight. A man with a beam in his eye cannot get close enough, cannot see well enough, and will club his brother in the head with his own lumber while attempting to help. Here is the shattering part. The parable assumes something devastating about human perception, that the size of a fault is inversely related to how well we see it in ourselves. Everyone's own beam feels like a speck from the inside. That is not hypocrisy in the theatrical sense. It is the ordinary optics of the fallen heart. And it means the only safe assumption you can make when you find yourself sharply focused on someone else's flaw is that you are currently the less accurate observer in the room. Parable 16, Pearls before swine, Matthew 7:6. Give not that which is holy unto the dogs, neither cast ye your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet, and turn again and rend you. Immediately after telling you not to judge your brother's speck, Jesus tells you to make a judgment about who can receive what. That juxtaposition is not an accident, it is a guardrail. He has just dismantled censorious judgment, and he now prevents you from concluding that discernment itself has been abolished. The two animals are chosen for a Jewish audience with care. Dogs in that culture were not pets, but scavengers running in packs at the edges of towns. Swine were the definitive unclean animal. Both would take what was holy, sacrificial meat in the case of the dog, and treat it as ordinary food. A pig does not know a pearl from a pebble. It will root it into the mud, and then, finding it inedible, it may well turn on the one who threw it. What Jesus is protecting here is not you, it is the pearl. There are moments and there are people where the holiest thing you can do with a sacred truth is to keep it in your hand. Not out of contempt, remember he died for dogs and swine, and so must you, but out of respect for the thing itself and for timing. Some conversations should not happen today. Some testimonies should not be given to a person in the mood they are currently in. Some truths handed over in the wrong hour are not merely wasted. They are trampled, and the trampling hardens the tramplers against ever receiving them later. This is the parable that gives you permission to be silent, which is a permission a great many earnest believers have never been granted and badly need. Parable 17. The good gifts of the Father, Matthew 7:9-11. Or what man is there of you, whom if his son ask bread, will he give him a stone? Or if he ask a fish, will he give him a serpent? Jesus builds this argument from the lesser to the greater, which was a standard rabbinic form, and he builds it out of two pairs of objects that look alike. A small flat loaf of that region's bread resembles a smooth stone from the lakeshore. A certain eel-like fish from Galilee resembles a snake. These are not random. He's describing counterfeits, things that have the shape of the gift but not the substance, things that would look like an answer and turn out to be a wound. And he asks, is there a father anywhere who would do that to a child who asked? Then comes the line that should stop you. If ye then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to them that ask him? Being evil, he does not soften it. He is not flattering human parents. He is granting the worst possible assessment of them and arguing from it anyway. Even compromised, selfish, tired, damaged human fathers do not usually hand their kids a stone. So what does that make God? For some of you, this is the hardest parable in this entire study, because the analogy runs through a father, and the father you had handed you stones. Hear the structure carefully. Jesus is not saying God is like your father. He is saying God is unimaginably beyond the best version of what a father is. And the argument works precisely because human fathers are flawed. The comparison was never dependent on yours being good. Parable 18, the tree and its fruit. Matthew 7:16-20. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? There is a shrub in that region. the buckthorn that produces small, dark berries that from a distance can be mistaken for grapes. And there is a thistle whose flower head at a glance resembles a young fig. Jesus is not inventing an absurdity here. He is describing an actual field mistake that a careless eye could make from a distance and never make with fruit in hand. He gives it in the context of false prophets who come in sheep's clothing, and the test he provides is neither doctrinal statement nor charisma nor results. It is fruit, which is to say, what actually grows out of this person's life over time. Notice the two features of fruit that make it such a reliable test. First, fruit is slow. You cannot fake a season. Anyone can produce an impressive moment. Nobody can sustain an artificial harvest year after year. Second, fruit is involuntary. A tree does not decide to produce figs, it produces what it is. This is why Jesus can say a corrupt tree cannot bring forth good fruit. Not may not, cannot. What comes out is a report on what is inside, and given enough time, the report is always accurate. And this cuts both ways, which is the encouraging half. If you are worried tonight about whether the change in you is real, stop examining your feelings and look at your fruit over the last 3 years. Not your best day, your pattern. Trees are honest. Movement 2, the parables of the divided heart, what you actually trust. Parable 19, the single eye, Matthew 6:22-23. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. In the ancient world, the eye was often understood not merely as a receiver of light, but as a kind of lamp, the organ through which the inner state of a person shone out, and by which they perceived. And there is a second layer here that an English reader loses entirely. The word rendered single is hapless, which means simple, whole, undivided, without folds. And in the Greek of that era, it was also common idiom for generous. An evil eye in Hebrew idiom was a stingy one. That is not a stretch. It is the settled usage, and it is why Jesus places this saying in the middle of a passage entirely about money, immediately before the verse about serving 2 masters. So this is not a general statement about spiritual focus. It is a diagnostic about how you look at what you own. A person with a single eye, an undivided, generous way of seeing, is full of light. And a person whose eye is evil, who looks at everything through the calculation of what it costs and what it gets, is full of darkness. And then Jesus says, the sentence that lands like a stone dropped into deep water, if therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? Think about what that means. He is describing a person whose very faculty of perception has been corrupted, so that the instrument they would use to detect the problem is the problem. A man with a broken lamp knows he is in the dark. A man whose eye is dark does not know anything is wrong at all. He simply misjudges everything with total confidence. This is why generosity is not merely a virtue for Jesus. It is an optical instrument. Give, and you begin to see accurately. Grip, and the room goes dark by degrees so slowly you never notice the lights going out. Parable 20, 2 masters, Matthew 6:24. No man can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. The word Jesus uses is doulos, not employee, not contractor, but bondservant. And that single word carries the entire argument. A free laborer in the 1st century could absolutely hold 2 jobs. People did it constantly. But a slave belonged to a household. His time was not his own, his body was not his own, and there was no arrangement under which he could be owned by 2 households simultaneously, because ownership is not divisible. The moment a claim from one conflicted with a claim from the other, the fiction would collapse, and it would become instantly clear who actually owned him. So Jesus is not saying that dividing your loyalty is difficult. He is saying it is structurally impossible, and that everyone who believes they are doing it is simply living in the period before the collision. And notice Mammon. He personifies it. He does not say you cannot serve God and manage your finances. He treats money as a rival deity with a will, a voice, and a claim on your obedience. Anyone who has felt a bank balance dictate a decision that their conscience had already settled knows exactly why he personified it. Here is the mercy in it. Everyone who has tried to serve both is exhausted, and the exhaustion is not a character failure. It is the predictable fatigue of a man taking orders from two houses. Jesus is not adding a burden here. He is offering to end a war that you have been losing quietly for years. Parable 21, the ravens and the lilies. Matthew 6:25-34. Behold the fowls of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are ye not much better than they? He is teaching outdoors, on a hillside, and it is entirely likely that both illustrations were within sight. Birds working the air above the crowd, and the wildflowers that carpet the Galilean hills in spring, the crimson anemones that Solomon's dyers could never have matched. The argument has three moves, and they are worth separating. First, he does not tell anxious people to stop being anxious. He tells them to look at something. Behold the fowls. Consider the lilies. The word consider means to study carefully, to observe closely. He is prescribing an act of attention because worry is a form of tunnel vision, and the cure begins with turning your head. Second, he argues from value. The birds are fed and they own nothing. No sowing, no reaping, no barn, no storage, no 5-year plan. The flowers are clothed more gloriously than the wealthiest king in Israel's history, and they last a matter of weeks before they are cut and burned as fuel in a clay oven. If God invests that much artistry into something with a 2-week lifespan, what is the reasonable inference about you? Third, he names what worry actually is. Take no thought saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or wherewithal shall we be clothed? For after all these things do the Gentiles seek. Anxiety, in this diagnosis, is functional atheism, living as if there is no Father, which is precisely how the surrounding world had to live, because their gods were not fathers. And the closing instruction is not relax, it is seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Worry is not defeated by relaxation. It is displaced by a larger pursuit. Parable 22. The adversary on the road. Matthew 5:25-26. Agree with thine adversary quickly, whiles thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. Picture the scene precisely, because it is a scene. 2 men are walking the same road into town. One of them is bringing the other to court over a debt. They are traveling together. That is the whole tension of the image, and the walk is the last window in which anything can be resolved privately. Once they arrive, the matter passes out of their hands and into a machine. Judge, officer, prison, and a debt that must be paid to the uttermost farthing. Jesus sets this inside his teaching on anger, and he's doing something very shrewd. He has just said that contempt for a brother carries the weight of murder in the accounting of heaven. Now he describes the practical consequence. Unresolved conflict has a trajectory, and the trajectory hardens. There is a window. That is the point of the parable. Every rupture between 2 people has a period in which it is still soft, while you are yet in the way. And that period does not last forever. Positions calcify. Stories get told to third parties and become official. What could have been settled with one uncomfortable conversation in the first week becomes, in the second year, a structure that neither party can dismantle without losing face. Agree quickly, not because the other person deserves it, because the road is short and the courthouse is coming. Parable 23, the physician and the sick, Mark 2:17. They that are whole have no need of the physician, but they that are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. The setting is a dinner party, and it is a scandal. Jesus is reclining at table in the house of Levi, a tax collector, surrounded by other tax collectors and people the religious establishment classified simply as sinners. A technical term for those whose occupations or lifestyles put them outside the covenant community's fellowship. And the scribes of the Pharisees asked the disciples the question they are too careful to ask him directly. His answer is a single-image parable, and it is devastating in its economy. A doctor goes where the disease is. That is not a compromise of his profession. It is his profession. A physician who only ever spent time in the company of the healthy would be a fraud. So Jesus is not defending himself. He is explaining that his presence at that table is the most predictable thing in the world, and that the objection reveals a total misunderstanding of what he came to be. But the second half of the sentence has a hook in it that people miss. I came not to call the righteous. He does not mean there is a category of genuinely righteous people he is uninterested in. He means I cannot call people who have classified themselves as well. Not will not, cannot, in the way a doctor cannot treat a man who insists he has no symptoms. The barrier is not God's willingness, it is the self-diagnosis, which means the single most dangerous spiritual condition available to a human being is not gross sin. It is the settled conviction that you are basically fine. Parable 24, the bridegroom's guests. Mark 2:19-20. Can the children of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? They have asked him why his disciples do not fast when John's disciples and the Pharisees do. And he answers with a wedding. A Jewish wedding celebration in that era could run 7 days. During that week, the closest friends of the groom, the children of the bride chamber, had a defined social role, and it was joy. It was considered a religious duty to gladden the bridegroom. Rabbinic tradition actually released wedding guests from certain obligations during the feast, because you do not mourn at a wedding. Fasting during those 7 days would not have been piety. It would have been an insult to the host. So Jesus says, look at what is happening. You are asking why there is no fasting in the room, and the answer is that the bridegroom is standing in it. Do you see the claim he has just made, quietly, in the middle of a technical question about religious practice? He has identified himself as the bridegroom, and in the prophets, the bridegroom of Israel is God. He has done it so gently that the conversation continues without an explosion, and then the shadow. But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then shall they fast in those days. This is the first hint of the cross in Mark's Gospel, dropped into a wedding metaphor, and the word for taken away carries violence. Here is what shatters. Jesus is saying the correct spiritual posture depends entirely on where you are in relation to him, and that religious people constantly get it wrong in both directions, mourning in the presence of the bridegroom and celebrating when they should be on their faces. Parable 25, the new cloth on the old garment. Mark 2:21. No man also seweth a piece of new cloth on an old garment, else the new piece that filled it up taketh away from the old, and the rent is made worse. Any woman in that crowd would have understood this instantly, because every household mended clothes constantly. New, unshrunk cloth sewn onto an old garment will shrink at the first washing, while the old fabric, already shrunk years ago, will not move. The new patch pulls, and it tears out a hole larger than the one it was meant to close. Jesus is answering the assumption underneath the fasting question, the assumption that what he is doing is a reform, an improvement, a patch on the existing religious system, and he says, no, That will not work, and it will not work in a specific direction that ought to alarm us. The problem is not that the new is too weak for the old. The problem is that the new is too strong. It will not sit quietly inside the old structure. It will pull, and the old will tear. There is a warning here for the way many people try to receive Christ. They want him as a patch. They want the existing garment of their life, its priorities, its architecture, its idea of what a good life looks like, retained entirely, with a piece of Jesus sewn over the visible damage. And the honest testimony of 2,000 years is that this arrangement never holds. The living Christ does not function as reinforcement for a life organized around something else. He is not offering to mend your garment. He is offering you a new one. Parable 26. The new wine in old wineskins. Mark 2:22. And no man putteth new wine into old bottles, else the new wine doth burst the bottles, and the wine is spilled, and the bottles will be marred. But new wine must be put into new bottles. Wine was stored in vessels made from whole animal skins, sewn and sealed. A fresh skin was flexible. As new wine continued to ferment, releasing gas, the skin could stretch and accommodate the pressure. But an old skin, having already stretched once and then dried and hardened over years, had no give left in it. Put actively fermenting wine into that, and it will not bend. It will split, and you lose both. Same lesson as the patch, from the opposite angle. The patch parable is about structure. The wineskin parable is about pressure. And notice what Jesus values in the picture. He is not sentimental about the skin. The skin is a container. It exists entirely for the sake of what is inside it. When he weighs an old container against new wine, the wine wins every time. And that ought to be sobering for anyone whose primary spiritual instinct is preservation. Forms, structures, traditions, methods, the way we have always done it, all of these are skins. Some are excellent skins, but not one of them is the wine. The application is uncomfortably personal, though. The old wineskin is not only an institution, it is a heart that has hardened around its own previous experience of God. That is the tragedy of the long-time believer who cannot receive anything new, not because they are rebellious, but because they have set. And Jesus, who is unfailingly kind, is also unwilling to pour fresh wine into a vessel that will only waste it. Parable 27. The strong man bound. Mark 3:27. No man can enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he will first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his house. The accusation on the table is the ugliest one ever leveled at him, that he casts out demons by the prince of demons. And Jesus, having pointed out the obvious logical failure, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand, gives them this picture instead. A house, a strong man in it. Goods inside that belong to him by possession, if not by right. And an intruder who intends to carry those goods out. The strategy is stated with total clarity. You cannot plunder the house until you have dealt with its owner, not negotiated with him. Bound him. What Jesus is describing with almost military plainness is the actual structure of what is happening on the ground in Galilee. The people he is healing and delivering are not, in his framing, patients. They are property. Goods held in a house by a strong occupant, and every deliverance is a theft in progress, and the thief is Jesus, and he says so cheerfully. But the strategic point is the binding. He is not entering the house to fight a long, uncertain battle for possession of every item. He is saying the decisive act has been done at the level of the owner, and everything after it is collection. This is why the New Testament speaks of believers not as combatants hoping to win, but as those enforcing a verdict already reached. If someone you love is held in that house tonight, the parable does not promise you an easy extraction. It promises you that the strong man is not the strongest one in the story, and that he has already met someone who binds. Parable 28. The empty house swept clean. Matthew 12:43-45. When the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walketh through dry places seeking rest, and findeth none. Then he saith, I will return into my house from whence I came out. And when he is come, he findeth it empty, swept, and garnished. This is one of the most neglected and most urgently practical things Jesus ever said, and its logic is unforgettable. A house is vacated, and then it is cleaned, swept and garnished, put in order, decorated, made presentable. Anyone walking past would say the house has been improved beyond recognition. And the one word that undoes the whole picture is empty. The former occupant returns, finds the place vacant and freshly cleaned, and moves back in with 7 others worse than himself, and the last state of that man is worse than the first. Understand what is being taught. Deliverance is not the goal. Removal is not the goal. Cleanliness is not the goal. Occupancy is the goal. A life from which something has been evicted and into which nothing has been enthroned is not a safe life. It is an advertised vacancy in a neighborhood where things are looking for houses. This explains the pattern that has broken so many people's hearts. The person who genuinely got free, who really did stop, whose life visibly improved for a season, and who then collapsed harder than before. The failure was not in the stopping. It was in believing that stopping was the whole of it. You do not defeat a habit with a vacuum. You do not overcome darkness by subtraction. The room must be filled, which is why the New Testament never says merely put off. It always says put off and put on, and why Paul does not say stop being drunk with wine and leave it there, but says be filled with the Spirit. Parable 29. The children in the marketplace. Luke 7:31-35. They are like unto children sitting in the marketplace, and calling one to another, and saying, We have piped unto you, and ye have not danced. We have mourned to you, and ye have not wept. Picture children in a village square playing at the 2 great public events of adult life, weddings and funerals. One group pipes a wedding tune and the others refuse to dance, so they switch, they wail a funeral dirge, and the others refuse to mourn. The game cannot start because one faction will not play anything. Jesus applies it with surgical precision. John the Baptist came in the desert eating locusts, drinking nothing, an ascetic, and they said he had a devil. The Son of Man came eating and drinking at tables, in houses, at weddings, and they said, Look, a gluttonous man and a wine-bibber, a friend of publicans and sinners. Do you see what he has exposed? The objection was never about the style. The objection was to the message, and the style was merely the available excuse. Given a prophet who fasted, they complained he was too severe. Given a prophet who feasted, they complained he was too loose. There was no version of the messenger that would have been accepted because the resistance was never located in the messenger at all. This is one of the most freeing things in Scripture for anyone who has exhausted themselves trying to remove every objection people have to their faith. You cannot. Not because you are doing it badly, but because a heart that has decided will always find a reason, and the reasons are interchangeable. And then the closing line, which is quiet and enormous. But wisdom is justified of all her children. Wisdom does not win the argument in the square. It is vindicated later by what it produces. Parable 30. The 2 debtors. Luke 7:41-43. There was a certain creditor which had 2 debtors. The one owed 500 pence, and the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me therefore, which of them will love him most? The setting makes this parable almost unbearable. Jesus is at dinner in the house of Simon, a Pharisee, and a woman of the city. The phrase means what you think it means. Has come in uninvited, is standing behind him weeping, and her tears are falling on his feet. She wipes them with her hair, which no respectable woman would unbind in public, and she anoints them with ointment. Simon says nothing out loud, he thinks it, and Jesus answers the thought. The story is arithmetic. A denarius was a day's wage. 500 denarii is close to 2 years of labor. 50 is under 2 months. Both debtors are insolvent. Luke's phrasing is precise. They had nothing to pay, and the creditor cancels both debts outright. Then the question, which will love him more? Simon answers correctly, and you can hear it in the Greek, warily. I suppose that he to whom he forgave most, and Jesus turns the whole room. He walks through the hospitality Simon did not offer. No water for the feet, no kiss of greeting, no oil for the head, all of them ordinary courtesies, and sets each one beside what this woman has done with tears and hair and ointment. Here is the shattering line. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. Read it carefully. Jesus does not say Simon had a smaller debt. He says Simon believed he did. And the tragedy of the parable is not that the woman was worse than Simon. It is that Simon's low estimate of his own debt produced a low ceiling on his capacity for love, and that a man can sit at the same table as the Savior of the world, host him, feed him, and feel nothing at all, purely because he has underestimated what he owes. Parable 31. The blind leading the blind. Luke 6:39. Can the blind lead the blind? Shall they not both fall into the ditch? The roads of that country were not engineered surfaces. They ran along terraces and hillsides, with drop-offs, cisterns, quarry pits, and irrigation channels beside them. A blind man walking alone was in genuine danger. A blind man following another blind man was in double danger, because he had exchanged caution for confidence. That is the mechanism the parable exposes. The second man in the ditch did not fall because he was blind. He fell because he stopped feeling for the edge. He had a leader, and a leader relieved him of the burden of discernment, and the relief was the very thing that killed him. Jesus places this at the head of a sequence about judgment and about the mote and beam, and he follows it immediately with, "The disciple is not above his master, but every one that is perfect shall be as his master." Which is the truly frightening implication. You do not merely follow a teacher, you become like him. Whatever your teacher cannot see, you will eventually not see either. Discipleship reproduces vision, and it reproduces blind spots with equal fidelity. So the parable asks a question nobody enjoys asking. Who are you actually following? Not officially, actually. Whose voice has become the background assumption of your thinking? Because you are not merely learning their content. You are inheriting their peripheral vision, including the parts that are missing, and there is only one teacher in the whole story who is not blind. Movement 3. The parables of mercy. The stories that broke the rules. Parable 32. The Good Samaritan. Luke 10:30-37. A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves. Everything in this story is geographically exact. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho descends roughly 3,000 feet in about 17 miles, twisting through limestone gorges with blind corners and caves. It was notorious. Travelers went in groups. A man alone on that road was a man taking a risk, and the risk found him. He is stripped, beaten, and left half dead. And that phrase is the hinge of the entire parable. Stripped means no clothing, which in that world was how you identified a man's ethnicity, class, and region. Half dead means unconscious, which means he cannot speak, which means no accent. He has been reduced to a body in a ditch with no identifying markers whatsoever. Jesus has deliberately constructed a victim who cannot be categorized. Then the priest. Then the Levite, both going down, that is, heading away from Jerusalem, their temple service completed, so the usual excuse about ritual purity for duty does not hold as neatly as we are often told. Both see him. Both pass by on the other side. Luke gives no motive. He simply records the swerve. And then the third man, and here is where a first-century audience braced themselves, because the pattern priest-Levite-Israelite was a stock rhetorical structure, and everyone knew the third figure would be a good Jewish layman, the hero of the anti-clerical joke. Instead, a Samaritan. To that audience, this was not a neutral surprise. Samaritans were the despised half-breed heretics next door, the subject of a centuries-old blood feud, a people whom a rabbi could curse in public without controversy. And that man has compassion. The Greek verb is visceral. It describes being moved in the gut. He binds wounds, pours in oil and wine, puts the man on his own beast, walks beside him, pays for lodging, and leaves an open account with the innkeeper. 6 or 7 distinct acts, escalating in cost, and the last one is unlimited liability. Whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. Now the ending, because it is the thing everyone misremembers. The lawyer had asked, "Who is my neighbor?" A question about scope, designed to define the boundary of obligation. Jesus does not answer it. He asks a different question, which now of these 3 thinkest thou was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? He has moved the word neighbor from the object of love to the subject of it. You do not identify who qualifies for your mercy. You become the kind of person who is neighbor to whoever is in front of you, and the lawyer cannot even say the word. He answers, "He that showed mercy on him." He will not say Samaritan out loud. That is how deep it went, and that is the wall this parable was built to demolish. Parable 33. The friend at midnight. Luke 11:5-8. Which of you shall have a friend, and shall go unto him at midnight, and say unto him, Friend, lend me 3 loaves, for a friend of mine in his journey is come to me, and I have nothing to set before him. You have to see the house to understand the parable. A peasant home in that world was often a single room. The family slept together on a raised platform, sometimes with the animals below. The door was barred at night with a heavy wooden beam that could not be moved quietly. Waking that house meant waking everyone in it, and there is a cultural pressure driving the whole scene that a modern reader misses completely. Hospitality was not optional. An unexpected traveler arriving at night created an absolute obligation on the household, and in a village that small, on the village. To have nothing to set before a guest was a genuine social catastrophe, not for the man alone, but for the community's honor. So he goes at midnight and knocks. And the friend inside says what any exhausted man with sleeping children would say, "Do not trouble me. The door is now shut." Then the line, "Though he will not rise and give him because he is his friend, yet because of his importunity he will rise and give him as many as he needeth." That word importunity is anaidia, and it does not mean persistence exactly. It means shamelessness, literally, the absence of shame. The man gets his bread because he was willing to be undignified about it. Now be careful how you apply this, because Jesus is arguing by contrast, not by comparison. He is not saying God is a reluctant sleeper who must be worn down. He is saying, if even an irritated neighbor will eventually respond to shameless asking, how much more will a father who has never once been irritated by you and who does not sleep? The invitation is to pray without dignity. Most of us pray like people making a formal request to a distant office. The parable commends the man standing in the street at midnight, banging on a door, not caring who hears him. Parable 34. The rich fool. Luke 12:16-21. The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully, And he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, because I have no room where to bestow my fruits? A man in the crowd has just asked Jesus to settle an inheritance dispute with his brother. Jesus refuses the role of judge and instead warns against covetousness, and then tells this: read the man's monologue closely and count the pronouns. What shall I do? My fruits, my barns, my goods, my soul. In 2 verses he says I, or my roughly 11 times. There is no other character in his thinking, no wife, no workers, no neighbors, no poor, and no God. He is a closed system, having a conversation with himself, and the entire crisis of his life is a storage problem. Notice too that he has done nothing illegal. He did not steal the harvest. He did not defraud anyone. Jesus even says the ground brought forth plentifully. The abundance is a gift, and the man never once considers that a gift implies a giver. He is not a villain by any standard his culture would have applied. He is a success story. He is the man everyone in that village would have pointed to as blessed, and his plan is our entire retirement culture in a single sentence. Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Then God speaks, and this is the only parable in which God is a speaking character, which tells you how seriously to take it. Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? Required. The word is a financial one, used of calling in a loan. The soul he was addressing so comfortably as his own possession turns out to have been on loan the whole time. And the closing line is the diagnosis. So is he that layeth up treasure for himself, and is not rich toward God. Not he who lays up treasure, he who lays up treasure for himself. The parable is not against barns. It is against a life with only one beneficiary. Parable 35, the watchful servants. Luke 12:35-38. Let your loins be girded about and your lights burning, and ye yourselves like unto men that wait for their Lord, when he will return from the wedding. 2 images of readiness open this. Girded loins means the long outer robe pulled up and tucked into the belt so a man can move and work, the ancient equivalent of rolled sleeves. Lights burning means the small clay lamps kept fueled through the night, which required someone to stay awake and trim them. The scenario is a household whose master is at a wedding feast, and wedding feasts in that culture had no fixed end. He could return at any hour. There is no schedule to prepare against. The only strategy available is continuous readiness. Then Jesus says something so extraordinary that commentators have struggled with it for centuries. Blessed are those servants, whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Verily I say unto you, that he shall gird himself, and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them. The master girds himself. The master seats the servants at his own table. The master serves. There was no social universe in which that happened. A slave who had waited up all night for his master expected to then produce a meal for him, not to be seated and waited on by him. And Jesus, who would shortly take a towel and wash 12 pairs of feet in an upper room, drops this into a parable about vigilance and moves on as if it were ordinary. That is the reward described here. Not a bonus, not promotion. The Lord of glory putting on the apron. If you are in a long season of waiting, watching a door that has not opened, keeping a lamp trimmed for something that has not come, this parable does not promise you a date. It promises you what happens when the door finally opens, and it is not what you are bracing for. Parable 36, the thief in the night. Luke 12:39-40. And this know, that if the goodman of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched, and not have suffered his house to be broken through. The phrase broken through is literally dug through, because the walls of an ordinary house were mud brick, and the simplest way in was not the door, but a hole excavated through the wall while the family slept. Jesus takes the most unwelcome figure imaginable and makes it a picture of his own return. It is a jarring choice, and he makes it deliberately, because the point of the image is not menace, it is unpredictability. A thief's entire method depends on the householder not knowing the hour. And this is where the parable quietly kills an entire industry. Every generation produces confident calculators of the date. Jesus says the defining feature of that hour is that it cannot be calculated, and then draws the only reasonable conclusion. Be ye therefore ready also, for the Son of Man cometh at an hour when ye think not. At an hour when ye think not. Not merely an hour you do not know, an hour you have specifically ruled out. The practical force of this is enormous, because most spiritual drift depends on a private assumption of margin. We do not consciously plan to be unready. We simply operate as if there will be a warning, a window, a season later on for getting serious. The thief image removes the window. There is no later that is guaranteed to exist, which means the only sane strategy is a life that would not need rearranging if the door opened tonight. Parable 37. The Faithful and Wise Steward. Luke 12:42-48. Who then is that faithful and wise steward, whom his Lord shall make ruler over his household, to give them their portion of meat in due season? Peter has just asked whether the previous parable was for the disciples or for everyone, and Jesus answers by narrowing to leadership. The oikonomos was not an ordinary slave. He was the household manager, often himself a slave, entrusted with the keys, the accounts, the provisions, and the authority to distribute food to the rest of the staff. Enormous trust. And the test Jesus applies to him is beautifully mundane. Does he give them their portion of meat in due season? That is it. Does he feed the people in his care on time while nobody is watching? Then the alternative. The steward who says in his heart, "My Lord delayeth his coming," and begins to beat the men servants and maidens, and to eat and drink and be drunken. Note the sequence exactly. The delay is not the sin. The conclusion drawn from the delay is. He converts the master's patience into evidence of the master's absence, and the moment he believes he is unobserved, his behavior toward the people under him changes, which reveals that his previous kindness was never character. It was surveillance management. And then the passage that ought to sober every teacher, parent, elder, and person with any influence over another soul. That servant which knew his Lord's will, and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. But he that knew not shall be beaten with few stripes. There are degrees. Judgment is calibrated to knowledge, which means the accumulation of spiritual understanding is not a neutral act. Every truth you receive raises your accountability, and this very study you are listening to right now is raising it. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required. Parable 38, Discerning the Signs. Luke 12:54-56. When ye see a cloud rise out of the west, straightway ye say, There cometh a shower, and so it is. And when ye see the south wind blow, ye say, There will be heat, and it cometh to pass. This is meteorology in Israel, and it is accurate. Weather from the west comes off the Mediterranean and brings rain. Wind from the south comes off the desert and brings scorching heat. Any farmer could read those two signs without thinking, and they were right often enough to plan a harvest around. And Jesus says, Ye hypocrites, ye can discern the face of the sky and of the earth, but how is it that ye do not discern this time? The rebuke is not about ignorance. It is about selective competence. These are not stupid people. They have highly developed powers of observation, careful pattern recognition, and the discipline to act on what they see, in every arena except the one that matters most. The very same men who would not plant on a bad forecast We're standing in front of the fulfillment of centuries of prophecy, watching the blind see and the dead rise, and drawing no conclusion at all. That is what makes hypocrite the right word here. It does not mean they were pretending to be religious. It means there was a split, a man capable of reading the sky and incapable of reading the hour, and the incapacity was chosen. Ask yourself honestly where your own competence stops. Most of us are shrewd about our finances, alert to our health, sharply observant about other people's motives, and strangely passive about the one question that determines everything. That is not an intelligence problem. It never was. Parable 39, the barren fig tree, Luke 13:6-9. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came and sought fruit thereon, and found none. Fig trees planted among vines were common. The soil worked for grapes suited them, and a fig gave shade and a second crop. This one has been there long enough for 3 years of inspection to have produced nothing. The owner's verdict is entirely reasonable, and that is what makes it uncomfortable. Cut it down. Why cumbereth it the ground? That last phrase is the argument. A barren tree is not neutral. It occupies soil, drinks water, takes light, and returns nothing. Its sin is not that it produces bad fruit. It is that it produces none while consuming everything a fruitful tree would need. And then the vine dresser intercedes, Lord, let it alone this year also, till I shall dig about it and dung it. And if it bear fruit, well, and if not, then after that thou shalt cut it down. There are 3 things to hold here, and they must be held together. First, intercession is real, and it changes outcomes. Someone stood between that tree and the axe, and the tree got another year purely because someone asked. Second, the extra year is not idle. The vine dresser does not merely postpone, he digs and fertilizes. Grace is not a suspension of attention. It often arrives as disruption, the ground around your roots being broken open, unpleasant things applied to your life, a season of being worked on. Do not mistake being dug around for being abandoned. Third, the reprieve has an end. If not, then after that thou shalt cut it down. Jesus tells this immediately after twice saying, Except ye repent, ye shall all likewise perish. The mercy is enormous, and it is not infinite, and the fact that the axe has not fallen this year is not evidence that it does not exist. Parable 40, the lowest seat at the feast. Luke 14:7-11. When thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. Luke tells us exactly why Jesus said this. He was at a dinner in the house of a chief Pharisee, and he marked how they chose out the chief rooms. He watched the seating scramble. Understand that in that culture, table position was not a matter of comfort. It was a public statement of rank, visible to every guest, and the honor economy of the ancient Mediterranean world ran on precisely these signals. Getting it right was a career skill. Getting it wrong, being asked to move down while everyone watched, was a humiliation people remembered for years. So Jesus offers what sounds at first like tactical advice. Take the lowest seat, and let the host move you up. Then shalt thou have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee. And a cynic will say, this is just a shrewder way to win the same game. Take the low seat as a strategy for a public promotion, which is exactly why the parable ends where it does. For whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Jesus lifts the whole thing out of dinner party tactics and states it as a law of the universe. There is a gravitational rule in the moral order, and it runs opposite to the physical one. What rises falls, and what lowers itself is raised. The test of whether you have actually understood it is simple. Would you take the lowest seat if nobody ever moved you? If the answer is no, the seat was a maneuver. And the reason this parable is in the gospel is that everyone who has ever tried to fake humility as a strategy has discovered that it is the one virtue that evaporates the instant you use it. Parable 41, the Great Banquet. Luke 14:16-24. A certain man made a great supper and bade many, and sent his servant at supper time to say to them that were bidden, "Come, for all things are now ready." The custom explains the outrage. Invitations went out well in advance and were accepted in advance. Then, when the food was prepared, and for a great supper that meant an animal slaughtered, a quantity of meat that had to be eaten that day, a second summons was sent to say the hour had come. To accept the first invitation and refuse the second was not a scheduling conflict. It was a calculated public insult delivered at the moment of maximum cost. And the excuses are almost comically thin. I have bought a piece of ground and must go see it. Nobody buys land unseen. I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and must prove them. Nobody buys 10 oxen untested. I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. And that one does not even bother with a pretext. Look at what the 3 excuses have in common: property, work, and family. Not vices, legitimate goods, every one of them. This parable is not about how sin keeps people from God. It's about how good things, held at the wrong moment, do the same work that sin would have done. Then the master's anger and the 2 waves of invitation. First into the streets and lanes of the city, the poor, the maimed, the halt, the blind. Precisely the categories excluded from full participation in temple life. Then when there is still room, out into the highways and hedges beyond the town, to those with no connection to the household at all. Compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. That verb has been badly misused across church history. But in its context, it describes the pressure a servant would need to apply to convince a beggar that he was genuinely wanted at a nobleman's table. Some people need to be persuaded that the invitation is real because they cannot believe it applies to them, and the last line falls like a door closing. None of those men which were bidden shall taste of my supper. Parable 42, the Tower Builder. Luke 14:28-30. Which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? The setting is enormous crowds. Multitudes are following him, and popularity is at its peak, and Jesus turns around and starts talking about hating father and mother and carrying your own cross. This is not a man building a movement. This is a man deliberately thinning one. The tower here is most likely a vineyard watchtower, a stone structure for guarding a valuable crop, substantial but ordinary. And the picture is of a man who lays a foundation, runs out of money, and leaves it standing half-built where everyone can see it. All that behold it begin to mock him, saying, "This man began to build and was not able to finish." That unfinished foundation is a permanent public monument to enthusiasm without calculation. Now here is what shatters, and it runs against a great deal of modern evangelism. Jesus is telling people to sit down and calculate before following him. He is not lowering the entry price to increase the yes rate. He is publishing the price in full, in advance, to the largest crowd he ever drew. And he does it because he would rather have 100 who counted than 10,000 who did not. If you were brought into faith on the promise that it would cost you nothing, you were told something Jesus never said. And if you are currently standing at a half-built foundation, discouraged by a faith that turned out to be more expensive than you were led to expect, the answer is not to abandon the site. It is to sit down finally and count, and then to build with your eyes open. Parable 43, the king going to war. Luke 14:31-33. Or what king, going to make war against another king, sitteth not down first, and consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000. The twin of the tower, and the escalation is deliberate. The first parable is about a building project. A man can walk away from that with embarrassment. The second is about a war. A king who miscalculates does not lose money, he loses his people. The stakes rise, and the numbers are explicitly unequal, 10 against 20. And notice the outcome Jesus recommends for the outmatched king. He sendeth an ambassage and desireth conditions of peace. He does not counsel a heroic last stand. He counsels surrender. That is the point, and it is easy to miss because we assume the parable is about being resolute. It is not. It is about accurately assessing that you cannot win and making terms while the other king is still far off. Read the sentence Jesus attaches to it. So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. The terms of peace are total, not most, not the negotiable portion, all. And here is the mercy inside a hard saying. The ambassage goes out while the opposing king is yet a great way off, that is, in the window before the confrontation. There is a period, and you are in it right now, during which surrender is still an option freely offered rather than a defeat imposed. That window will not always be open, but while it is, the king who knows he is outmatched and asks for terms is not the fool of the story. He is the wise one. Movement 4, the parables of the lost, the heart of God made visible. Parable 44, the lost sheep. Luke 15:3-7. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he lose one of them, doth not leave the 99 in the wilderness, and go after that which is lost, until he find it? Luke sets the stage in one sentence, and you must not skip it. Then drew near unto him all the publicans and sinners for to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners, and eateth with them. Everything in Luke 15, all three of the great lost parables, is an answer to that complaint. Jesus is not teaching a general lesson on evangelism. He is defending his dinner guests, and he begins with sheep, which is a needling choice, because shepherds in that era were a low-status occupation, ritually suspect, and the men he is talking to would not have wanted the comparison. The shepherd counts 99. The number is wrong, and he leaves the 99 in the wilderness, which sounds reckless until you understand that flocks were commonly grazed communally and that leaving them under the care of others was normal practice. Then he goes after the one, and Jesus adds 3 words that carry the whole gospel in them. Until he find it, not for a while, not until dark, until, and then the detail that undoes people. When he hath found it, he layeth it on his shoulders, rejoicing. A grown sheep is heavy, perhaps 60 or 70 pounds of dead weight, and the terrain is not flat. The finding is not the end of the labor. It is the beginning of the hardest part, and he is rejoicing while carrying it, not lecturing it, not driving it home ahead of him with a rod, carrying it. Likewise joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repenteth, more than over 99 just persons which need no repentance. That last clause is edged with irony. He is looking directly at men who believe they need no repentance and telling them that heaven throws its parties elsewhere. Parable 45, the lost coin. Luke 15:8-10. Either what woman having 10 pieces of silver, if she lose one piece, doth not light a candle and sweep the house, and seek diligently till she find it? The second story shifts everything, from a man to a woman, from outdoors to indoors, from 100 to 10, from wilderness to a house floor. Jesus is a careful teacher. He keeps changing the angle so that no one can dismiss the point as belonging to somebody else's world. The 10 pieces of silver were most likely a woman's dowry coins, sometimes worn strung together as a headdress, and their loss carried a weight beyond their monetary value. But even taken plainly, 1 drachma was about a day's wage, and she has 10. This is not a wealthy household. 10% of everything she has is gone. Watch her method. She lights a lamp. The houses had few windows and dark floors. She sweeps. The floor is packed earth or rough stone, and the sound of a coin moving is as likely to find it as the sight. She seeks diligently. 3 verbs, escalating effort in a small dark room, on her hands and knees. And here is what makes this parable different from the sheep. The sheep wandered off. The coin did nothing. It cannot stray, cannot bleat, cannot be blamed, and cannot participate in its own recovery in any way. It was lost inside the house by no fault of its own, and it did not even know it was missing. Some of you have been lost like the sheep. You walked away and you know exactly when. And some of you have been lost like the coin. You never left. You have been inside the house the whole time, in church, in the family, going through everything, and somewhere along the way you slipped into a crack in the floor and nobody noticed, possibly including you. The parable's answer to both is the same. Somebody lit a lamp and started sweeping. Parable 46. The Prodigal Son. Luke 15:11-24. A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me." This is the most famous story ever told, and familiarity has sanded down its edges, so let us restore them. The request is a death wish. In that culture, inheritance passed at the father's death. To ask for it while he is alive and healthy is to say, in public, that you wish he were dead and are unwilling to wait. It was so serious a dishonor that a father would have been within his rights to disown the boy on the spot, and the village would have backed him. Instead, he divided unto them his living. The word is bios, his life. He divides his life between them. He gives. Then the far country, and the fast dissolution, and the famine, and the collapse into the one job a Jewish boy could not sink lower than feeding pigs and envying them their husks. And Luke writes the loneliest line in the Bible. No man gave unto him. Then he came to himself. Notice the phrasing. Not he repented, not he grew wise, but he came to himself as a man surfacing from a fever. His rehearsed speech is honest but calculating. He plans to negotiate for hired servant status, which would let him earn his way back and preserve some dignity. And he never gets to finish it. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him. Which means the father had been looking. Every day, for however long it took, the old man had been watching a road, and had compassion and ran. No dignified man of that age and status ran in public. It required lifting the robe and exposing the legs, and it was humiliating. He ran anyway, and he ran through a village that had every right to shame that boy at the gate, and he reached him first and covered him with his own body and his own shame before anyone could touch him. The best robe, the ring, which is authority, the shoes, which slaves did not wear, the fatted calf, which means the whole village eats, which means the reconciliation is made public and irreversible. The son never gets to offer his hired servant proposal. Grace interrupts the speech. Parable 47, the elder brother, Luke 15:25-32. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. The story does not end with the ring and the calf. Jesus deliberately keeps going, because the second half is the half aimed at the men who started the conversation, the ones murmuring that he eats with sinners. The elder brother is outside, and he will not come in. And the father, this is the same movement as before, and everyone misses it, comes out to him. He left the party to go and plead with the son who is angry, exactly as he had run down the road for the son who was gone. 2 sons, 2 exits from the house, 1 father who goes out both times. Listen to the elder brother's speech, because it is a masterpiece of psychological accuracy. Lo, These many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment. And yet thou never gavest me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. Serve. He uses the language of employment about his own father. Years of flawless compliance experienced as labor with an expected wage attached, and a bitter ledger kept in silence the whole time. And this thy son. He will not say, my brother. The father gently corrects him in the last verse. This thy brother was dead, and is alive again. Here is what shatters, and it is the reason this parable exists. Both sons wanted the father's things and not the father. One took his inheritance and left. One stayed home and earned it, resenting every hour. The younger son's rebellion was obvious, and it brought him home. The elder son's rebellion was invisible, respectable, morally impeccable, and it left him standing in a field in the dark, outside a party, thrown by a father who was begging him to come in. And Jesus ends the story without telling us what the elder brother decided. The door is left open mid-sentence because he is telling it to elder brothers who are still standing in the yard, and he is inviting them in, and the ending is theirs to write. Parable 48. The Shrewd Manager. Luke 16:1-13. There was a certain rich man which had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. This is widely considered the most difficult parable in the Gospels, and the difficulty is real. The man Jesus commends is a crook. The steward is fired for mismanagement. Given notice, and knowing he is too weak to dig and too proud to beg, he does something audacious. He calls in his master's debtors, men owing quantities of oil and wheat that represent serious money, and he slashes their bills, one by 50%, another by 20%. He's buying friends with his master's assets in the window before his keys are taken, and the master, hearing of it, commends him. Not for honesty, Jesus calls him the unjust steward in the same sentence, but because he had done wisely. So what is being praised? Precisely one thing, and Jesus names it. The children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. The commendation is for clear-eyed, decisive, forward-looking use of a closing window. The steward understood three things with total clarity. His position was ending, he could not change that, and the assets currently in his hands could be converted into something that would outlast his position. That is the entire lesson, and it lands like a hammer on the way most of us handle money and time. Make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. Jesus is saying, everything in your hands is temporary, and you are, spiritually speaking, already under notice. The dishonest steward is a better strategist than most believers because he actually acted on what he knew. And the question the parable leaves in the room is uncomfortable. If you truly believe that your position here is ending, what are you converting while you still can? Parable 49. The Rich Man and Lazarus. Luke 16:19-31. There was a certain rich man, which was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate, full of sores. Note something immediately. The beggar has a name, and the rich man does not. In every other parable, it is the reverse. The powerful are named or titled, and the poor are anonymous. Jesus inverts the convention before the story even begins. The details are exact. Purple dye was ruinously expensive. Fine linen was Egyptian byssus, worn as undergarments by the very wealthy. Fared sumptuously every day means a feast daily, not on festivals. And laid at his gate means someone carried Lazarus there and dumped him. He could not walk. The dogs licked his sores, and he desired the crumbs, which in a wealthy house meant the pieces of bread used to wipe hands and then thrown down. The rich man's sin is never stated. He does not kick Lazarus. He does not order him removed. He simply steps over him every day for years on his own doorstep. That is the entire indictment, proximity without perception. Then both men die, and the geography reverses completely, and the rich man, even in torment, still cannot see Lazarus as a person. He asks Abraham to send Lazarus with water, then to send Lazarus to his brothers. He's still issuing instructions about a man he never once spoke to in life. Habits of the heart do not evaporate at death, and Abraham's final answer is the line that hangs over the whole passage. If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. Which is a sentence Jesus spoke knowing exactly what he was about to do, and knowing exactly how many would remain unpersuaded anyway. The problem was never insufficient evidence. It never has been. Parable 50, the unprofitable servants, Luke 17:7-10. But which of you, having a servant ploughing or feeding cattle, will say unto him by and by, when he is come from the field, go and sit down to meat? This one stings, and it is meant to. A servant has been in the field all day. He comes in exhausted, and Jesus asks the crowd a question with an obvious answer in their culture. Does the master seat him and serve him? No. He says, make my supper, gird yourself, serve me, and afterward you may eat. Doth he thank that servant because he did the things that were commanded him? I trow not. And then, so likewise ye, when ye shall have done all those things which are commanded you, say, we are unprofitable servants, we have done that which was our duty to do. Now hold this next to Parable 35, where the master girds himself and serves the watching servants. The two pictures appear to contradict, and the contradiction is the teaching. Duty says, I am owed nothing. Grace says, he serves me anyway. If you take the second without the first, you become entitled. If you take the first without the second, you become a slave. Both are in the Gospel of Luke, spoken by the same mouth, and the Christian life lives in the tension between them. What this parable kills is the ledger, the quiet internal accounting by which we believe our obedience is accumulating credit. There is no credit. Doing what you were made to do earns nothing, and the moment you believe it does, everything God gives you becomes a payment rather than a gift, and gratitude dies. Say it honestly, I am an unprofitable servant, and then watch what happens when the master, owing you nothing whatsoever, sits you down at his own table. Parable 51, the persistent widow, Luke 18:1-8. There was in the city a judge which feared not God, neither regarded man. Luke tells us the purpose before the parable begins, a rare kindness, that men ought always to pray and not to faint. The judge is a portrait of total moral vacancy, described in two directions. No vertical accountability, no horizontal shame. He is answerable to nothing, and the widow is the exact opposite of power in that world. No husband, no legal standing, no money for a bribe, no advocate. In the Hebrew scriptures, the widow is the standing symbol of the defenseless, and God repeatedly declares himself her protector. She has one asset: she will not stop coming. And the judge's internal monologue is almost funny in its candor. Though I fear not God, nor regard man, yet because this widow troubleth me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me. The verb translated weary is a boxing term, literally to strike under the eye. He is saying, this woman is going to give me a black eye. He does justice out of pure self-interest. Then Jesus argues from the lesser to the greater. Shall not God avenge his own elect, which cry day and night unto him, though he bear long with them? Every element is inverted. The judge is unjust. God is just. The widow is a stranger. You are his elect. The judge is annoyed. God is not. If shameless persistence works on the worst possible judge, what will it do at the throne of the best possible Father? And then the ending, which is not what you expect from a parable about persistence. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on the earth? The question is not whether God will answer. It is whether we will still be knocking when he does. Parable 52, the Pharisee and the Publican, Luke 18:9-14. Two men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee and the other a publican. Luke again tells us the target audience, those which trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Notice that both halves come together. Self-trust and contempt are always a matched pair. The Pharisee's prayer is technically accurate. He does fast twice a week, which exceeds the requirement. He does tithe of all he possesses. He is not an extortioner or an adulterer. Everything he says about himself is true. That is what makes this parable so dangerous. The man is not a hypocrite in the ordinary sense. He is genuinely religious and genuinely diligent. But read the grammar. God, I thank thee that I am not as other men are. The prayer has one subject, and it is not God. Luke says he prayed thus with himself, which may mean he prayed silently, or may mean, more devastatingly, that he was the only one listening. And the publican, a tax collector, a collaborator with Rome, a man whose repentance would technically have required restitution to everyone he had defrauded, which was often impossible, stands far off. He will not lift his eyes. He beats his breast, a gesture of grief so intense that in that culture it was primarily made by women. And he prays 7 words in the Greek, God be merciful to me, a sinner. The definite article is there, not a sinner among many, the sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. That verb, justified, is the great word of the New Testament. And Jesus attaches it here before any cross, before any doctrine of atonement is articulated, to a man who brought nothing but honesty. And he attaches nothing at all to the man who brought a resume. Parable 53, the 10 pounds, Luke 19:11-27. A certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. Luke tells us why this was spoken, because Jesus was near Jerusalem and the crowd thought the kingdom of God was about to appear immediately. This parable is a corrective to that expectation, and the setting would have been recognizable to every listener. When Herod the Great died, his son Archelaus traveled to Rome to have his kingship confirmed, and a delegation of Jewish citizens traveled after him to petition against it. Jesus has built a parable out of recent political memory. But his citizens hated him and sent a message after him saying, "We will not have this man to reign over us." The nobleman gives 10 servants 1 pound each, a mina, roughly 3 months' wages, identical amounts, which distinguishes this parable from the talents. Each man receives exactly the same, and the differing outcomes therefore cannot be explained by differing endowment. One turns his into 10 and receives 10 cities. One turns his into 5 and receives 5. And the third returns his pound, wrapped in a napkin with a speech. I feared thee, because thou art an austere man. Thou takest up, that thou layedst not down, and reapest that thou didst not sow. He did not lose the money. He did not spend it. He protected it perfectly, and he is condemned, not for failure but for fear, and specifically for a fear rooted in a false picture of his master's character. The master answers him on his own terms. Out of thine own mouth will I judge thee. If you truly believed I was that kind of man, your behavior makes no sense even by your own logic. You would at least have put it in the bank. That is the shattering center of this parable. What you believe about God's character determines what you do with what he gives you. A person who secretly believes God is harsh will bury everything and call it reverence and lose it all. Parable 54. The Unmerciful Servant. Matthew 18:23-35. Therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king, which would take account of his servants. Peter has asked how often he must forgive, and proposed 7 times, a generous number by contemporary rabbinic standards, which suggested 3. Jesus says 70 times 7, and then tells this story to explain the arithmetic. The numbers are the whole parable, and English flattens them. The first servant owes 10,000 talents. A talent was roughly 6,000 denarii, and a denarius was a day's wage. 10,000 talents is therefore on the order of 60 million days of labor. The annual tax revenue of the entire region of Galilee and Perea in that era was a small fraction of this sum. Jesus has chosen a number that is not merely large, but deliberately absurd. The largest numeral in Greek attached to the largest unit of currency. It is a debt no life could ever produce or repay. The king orders the man sold with his family. The man begs for patience and promises to pay it all, which is the pathetic part. He still thinks it is a scheduling problem. And the king, moved with compassion, does not extend the timeline. He cancels the debt entirely. The same man walks out and finds a colleague who owes him 100 pence, 100 denarii, about 3 months' wages, a real debt. Not nothing, but set beside 60 million days, it is a rounding error. He takes him by the throat and refuses the identical plea he himself had just made, word for word, and throws him into prison. And here is the line to carry out of this parable. Shouldest not thou also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? The injury done to you may be genuinely serious. Jesus does not pretend the 100 pence is imaginary. He simply insists that you keep both numbers on the same page, and that the moment you lose sight of the 10,000 talents, you become capable of anything. Movement 5. The parables of the kingdom's economy, grace that offends parable. 55. The camel and the needle's eye. Matthew 19:24. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. A rich young man has just walked away sorrowful, and Jesus watches him go and says this to the disciples, who are exceedingly amazed, a reaction that tells you how thoroughly they assumed wealth was a sign of God's approval. There is a popular explanation that the needle's eye was a small gate in Jerusalem's wall that a camel could squeeze through on its knees. There is no historical evidence for such a gate. The story appears many centuries later, and the explanation ruins the parable because it converts an impossibility into a difficulty. Jesus chose the largest animal in Palestine and the smallest opening in domestic life precisely to make the picture absurd. That is why the disciples respond, "Who then can be saved?" They understood him correctly. He was not saying, "It is hard." He was saying, "It cannot be done." And his answer is the hinge of the entire gospel. With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Now hear why wealth in particular. It is not that money is evil. It is that money is the most effective substitute for God ever devised, because it does, in a limited and temporary way, what God does. It provides security, options, protection, status, and the ability to solve problems. A man with enough of it can go decades without ever needing anything he cannot buy. A need is the doorway. Which is why this parable is not only about the very wealthy. If you have never in your life faced a problem that money could not touch, you are the rich man in this story, whatever your income. And the mercy is that the same sentence which closes the door, impossible with men, is the sentence that opens it, possible with God. Parable 56. The laborers in the vineyard. Matthew 21:16. For the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. The day laborer of that world lived on the edge, He stood in the market at dawn hoping to be hired, and if he was not hired, his family did not eat that night. That is the desperation standing in the marketplace at the 11th hour. Those men are not lazy. They say so themselves. Because no man hath hired us. The householder goes out 5 times, dawn, 9, noon, 3 and 5 in the afternoon. With the first group, he negotiates a contract. A penny a day, the standard wage. With everyone after that, he simply says, "Whatsoever is right I will give you," and they go on trust. Then evening, and the steward is instructed to pay beginning with the last. That instruction is deliberate, and it is the source of the entire conflict. If he had paid the first group first, they would have taken their agreed wage and gone home content. He arranges the payment so that the men who worked 12 hours watch the men who worked 1 hour receive a full day's pay, and their complaint is not unreasonable. These last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden and heat of the day. Read the householder's reply slowly, because it contains the whole thing. Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst not thou agree with me for a penny? Take that thine is, and go thy way. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil, because I am good? Nobody was underpaid. Some were overpaid. And the offense was not injustice. The offense was generosity directed at somebody else. This is the parable that exposes the deepest reflex of the religious heart, the assumption that grace given to a latecomer somehow devalues my long service. It is why the older brother stayed in the yard. And Jesus is saying to everyone who has served for decades, you were never earning, you were always receiving, and the man who came in at 5 o'clock has not taken one thing from you. Parable 57, the 2 sons, Matthew 21:28-32. A certain man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, Son, go work today in my vineyard. He answered and said, I will not. But afterward he repented and went. Jesus is now in Jerusalem in the temple, in the last week of his life, and he is speaking directly to the chief priests and elders who have just demanded to know by what authority he acts. The story is 4 sentences. One son says no and goes. The other says, I go, sir. And the address is deferential, the perfect answer, the words a father hopes to hear, and does not go. Then Jesus asks them to render the verdict. Whether of them twain did the will of his father? And they answer correctly, because it is not a hard question, the first, and then the trap closes. Verily I say unto you, that the publicans and the harlots go into the kingdom of God before you. Understand the violence of that sentence in that setting. He is telling the religious aristocracy of Israel in the temple courts that collaborators and prostitutes are ahead of them in line, and he has just made them pronounce the judgment on themselves before they saw it coming. That is what a parable does. It gets a verdict before the defendant realizes he is the subject, and the reason he gives is precise. John came unto you in the way of righteousness, and ye believed him not. But the publicans and the harlots believed him. And ye, when ye had seen it, repented not afterward that ye might believe him. They watched transformation happen in front of them, in people they despised, and it did not move them. There is a hardness that is not disproved by evidence, it is confirmed by it. The parable asks one question of you, and it has nothing to do with what you said on the day you were asked. Are you, right now, in the vineyard? Parable 58, the wicked tenants, Matthew 21:33-41. There was a certain householder which planted a vineyard, and hedged it round about, and digged a winepress in it, and built a tower, and let it out to husbandmen, and went into a far country. Every detail in that opening sentence is lifted from Isaiah chapter 5, the Song of the Vineyard, where Israel is explicitly the vineyard of the Lord." His listeners recognized the quotation immediately. They knew from the first line that this story was about them. Absentee landlords with tenant farmers were common in Galilee, and so were disputes over the harvest share. The escalation Jesus describes is deliberate and terrible. Servants sent, beaten, stoned, killed. More servants sent, treated the same. And finally, last of all, he sent unto them his son, saying, "They will reverence my son." And the tenants reason among themselves, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and let us seize on his inheritance." Note what the murder reveals. They do not kill the son out of rage, they kill him out of calculation. They believe that if the heir is removed, the vineyard becomes theirs by possession. It is the oldest theological error in existence, the belief that if we can get rid of the owner, we get to keep the world. And then Jesus does the same thing he did in the previous parable. He asks them to pass sentence. "When the Lord therefore of the vineyard cometh, what will he do unto those husbandmen?" And they answer, out of their own mouths, "He will miserably destroy those wicked men, and will let out his vineyard unto other husbandmen." They have just convicted themselves in public, standing in the temple 4 days before they hand him to Rome. Matthew notes that they perceived it afterward, and that they wanted to seize him and could not, because they feared the crowd. The parable landed, and it did not soften them. It hardened them. That is the other thing parables do. Parable 59, the rejected cornerstone, Matthew 21, 42-44. "Did you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner?" He attaches this immediately to the vineyard and shifts the picture from agriculture to construction. The cornerstone in ancient building was the first stone set, cut with absolute precision, from which every line, angle, and level of the structure was derived. Every other stone was positioned relative to it. If it was wrong, the entire building was wrong. And the picture is of builders, professionals, men whose job is to know stone, examining this one and discarding it, not out of ignorance, out of expertise. They looked at it with trained eyes and judged it unsuitable, and the stone they threw on the pile turned out to be the one the whole structure required. That is what the religious leadership of Israel had done, and Jesus is quoting Psalm 118, a psalm sung by pilgrims coming up to the feast, which the crowds had been shouting at him days earlier as he rode into the city. Then he adds a line that is not comfortable. "Whosoever shall fall on this stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder." 2 ways to meet the same stone. You can fall on it and be broken, which is what happens to a person who comes to Christ and has their self-sufficiency shattered. Or you can wait and have it fall on you. Both involve breaking. Only one is survivable. And the entire difference between them is whether you did the falling. Parable 60, the wedding feast of the king's son. Matthew 22, 1-10. "The kingdom of heaven is like unto a certain king, which made a marriage for his son, and sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding, and they would not come." This is not a duplicate of the great banquet in Luke. The setting is different, the stakes are higher, and the host is a king holding a wedding for the crown prince, which makes refusal not merely rude, but seditious. The first servants are ignored. The second wave meets something worse. "They made light of it, and went their ways, one to his farm, another to his merchandise, and the remnant took his servants, and entreated them spitefully, and slew them." 2 responses to the invitation, and both are fatal. Some are indifferent, farm, business, the ordinary weight of daily life. Some are violent, and Jesus, days from the cross, in the city that had killed its prophets, is describing the actual history of God's messengers to his own people with unflinching clarity. The king's response is military. He sent forth his armies and destroyed those murderers and burned up their city. 40 years later, Roman legions did exactly that to Jerusalem, and then the extraordinary reversal, "Go ye therefore into the highways, and as many as ye shall find, bid to the marriage." The servants go out and gather everyone they can find, and here is the phrase that ought to stop you, both bad and good, in that order. The hall fills with people who had no invitation, no standing, no preparation, and no qualification other than that they were on the road when the servants came through. If you have ever thought you were too far outside to be in that hall, read the guest list again. It was assembled by men who were told to stop screening. Parable 61, the man without a wedding garment. Matthew 22:11-14. And when the king came in to see the guests, he saw there a man which had not on a wedding garment. And he saith unto him, Friend, how camest thou in hither not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. This is the sting in the tale, and it is one of the hardest images in the Gospels, precisely because it follows the most open invitation in the Gospels. The tension is obvious. These people were dragged in off the highways with no notice. How could any of them have a wedding garment? The answer, well attested in the customs of royal hospitality in the ancient East, is that the host provided them. A king summoning strangers to a state wedding did not expect them to arrive dressed. He supplied the robes at the door, which makes this man's condition a deliberate act. He did not fail to obtain a garment. He declined one. He came into the king's hall on the king's invitation and refused the king's clothing, preferring to attend in what he arrived in. And when confronted, he was speechless. The word means muzzled. He has no answer because there is no answer. Here is the truth this parable protects, and the church has needed it in every century. The invitation is free, and it is indiscriminate, and it goes to the bad as well as the good. And it is not the same thing as saying that nothing at all is required of the one who comes. What is required is not merit. It is the willingness to be clothed in something that is not yours. Everyone in that hall was unqualified. Only one insisted on remaining in his own clothes. Parable 62, the budding fig tree. Matthew 24:32-33. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh. Most trees in that region are evergreen, the olive, the oak, the pine, and hold their leaves through winter. The fig is one of the few that goes bare, which means the fig is the tree that tells you the season has turned. When its branch softens and the leaves come, summer is not a forecast. It is a fact already in motion. Jesus is closing a long discourse about the end of the age, in which he has just said plainly that no one knows the day or the hour. And he is drawing a careful distinction that has been lost by nearly every generation since. You cannot know the date, and you can read the season. Those are not the same skill. A farmer looking at a budding fig cannot tell you which day the heat will arrive. He can tell you with total confidence that winter is finished. That is the posture Jesus commends, not calculation, not indifference, but attentiveness, watchers rather than accountants. And notice the verb he uses at the start, learn. He treats this as a skill to be acquired. The disciple is meant to develop an eye for what God is doing in a season, the way a countryman develops an eye for weather, by paying attention over years to things most people walk past. Parable 63, the days of Noah, Matthew 24:37-39. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark. Read the list of activities carefully, because it is the most surprising thing here. Eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage. Not violence, not idolatry, not the corruption that Genesis actually names as the reason for the flood. Jesus, describing the generation destroyed by water, selects 4 entirely ordinary, entirely legitimate human activities. Eating is good. Marriage is good. So what is he indicting? Not the activities, the absorption. And knew not until the flood came and took them all away. They were not evil in this description. They were oblivious, fully occupied with the normal business of being alive on the last ordinary morning that would ever occur. This is far more frightening than a picture of a wicked generation, because wickedness at least implies awareness. What Jesus describes is a world so successfully immersed in the immediate that the ultimate never entered the conversation. And there is one more detail. Noah built for decades in plain view, and the building itself was the warning. There was a preacher of righteousness and a project and a timeline, and none of it registered. Not because the evidence was hidden, because the crowd was busy. The test of this parable is not whether you are doing bad things. It is whether the coming of Christ is a live factor in how you are spending this week. Parable 64, the vultures and the carcass. Matthew 24:28. For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. One sentence, easily skipped, and it is a proverb of chilling accuracy. The birds in question are almost certainly griffon vultures, which ride thermals at great altitude, invisible from the ground, and which locate carrion not primarily by smell, but by watching one another. When one drops, the others see it and follow, and within minutes a body that was alone in an empty landscape is surrounded. Jesus says this in the middle of warnings about false Christs and false prophets, immediately after telling his followers not to chase after reports that the Messiah is in the desert or in the secret chambers. And the sense is this: you will not have to be told where it is. When the reality arrives, it will be as unmistakable and as self-evident as vultures circling. No one has to announce a carcass. The sky announces it. There is a second and more sobering reading that the church has long recognized. Death attracts. Where there is spiritual decay, the scavengers gather, and their arrival is a diagnosis. If a movement, a community, or a life has become the sudden focus of things that feed on rot, the honest question is not why are they here? It is what died. Parable 65 on the two in the field. Matthew 24:40-41. Then shall two be in the field, the one shall be taken and the other left. 2 women shall be grinding at the mill, the one shall be taken and the other left. 2 miniature scenes, and both are chosen for their absolute ordinariness. 2 men working the same row, 2 women at the same hand mill, a 2-person job, one feeding the grain and one turning the stone, sitting knee to knee, close enough to speak in low voices, doing it every single morning for years. You could not construct a tighter picture of similarity. Same work, same place, same hour, same social position, same appearance to any observer standing at the edge of the field. And a distinction runs between them that nobody in the field could see. That is the entire force of these 2 verses, and it explains why Jesus places them exactly where he does, between the days of Noah and the command to watch. The separation at the end is not drawn along the lines that human societies use to sort people. It does not follow occupation, nation, class, gender, visible religion, or reputation. It runs down the middle of a friendship. It runs down the middle of a marriage, a congregation, a family, a pair of hands on the same millstone. This should do 2 things in you at once. It should make you tender toward everyone you have quietly categorized because you cannot see the line. And it should make you deeply serious about your own standing, because proximity to the faithful is not the same thing as faith, and the woman on the other side of the millstone cannot carry you. Parable 66, the doorkeeper on watch, Mark 13:34-37. For the Son of Man is as a man taking a far journey, who left his house and gave authority to his servants and to every man his work, and commanded the porter to watch. 3 things are distributed before the master leaves, and the order matters: authority, work, and to one man specifically, the charge to watch. Notice that every servant receives something. There is no one in the house with nothing to do, and there is no one operating without delegated authority. This is not a household of subordinates awaiting instruction. It is a house left genuinely in their hands. But the porter has the particular job, and it is the least glamorous one in the building. He does not manage the accounts or work the fields. He sits by the door in the dark. Nothing happens for hours. His entire occupation is not being asleep. And then Jesus lists the 4 Roman night watches: at even, or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning. Each watch is 3 hours. He names all 4 because the master may come in any of them, and he is speaking, though his disciples do not know it yet, of a night that is now days away, in which one of them will fail at evening, another at midnight, and Peter will fail specifically at the cock crowing. And what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch. That last sentence is Jesus reaching past the 4 men sitting on the Mount of Olives and speaking to every generation between then and now. The instruction is not to calculate, not to withdraw, not to panic. It is to stay awake at your post, doing your assigned work with the authority you have been given, in a house where the master is genuinely absent and genuinely returning. Parable 67, the 10 virgins. Matthew 25, 1-13. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. The wedding customs illuminate everything. The groom went to the bride's home to complete the final negotiations and formalities with her family, and the timing was genuinely unpredictable. It could run late into the night. The bridal party waited near the groom's house to escort him back in a torchlight procession when he came. Their lamps were not decoration, they were the procession itself. 10 young women, all invited, all expecting the same groom, all carrying lamps. 5 brought extra oil in flasks. 5 brought only what was already in the lamp. Note what Jesus says next. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. All 10. The wise ones fell asleep too. Sleeping is not the failure in this parable, which should relieve some of you immediately. The distinction is not between the vigilant and the drowsy. It is between those who prepared for a delay and those who assumed there would not be one. Then the midnight cry, and the scramble, and the request, "Give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out." And the refusal, which sounds unkind until you understand what it means, "Not so, lest there be not enough for us and you." There are things that cannot be transferred at the last moment. Nobody can lend you a relationship with God. A wife cannot lend it to a husband. A mother cannot lend it to a son. The 5 wise women are not being selfish. They are being honest about the nature of the commodity. And then the door. And the door was shut. Watch, therefore, for ye know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. Parable 68, the talents. Matthew 25:14-30. For the kingdom of heaven is as a man travelling into a far country, who called his own servants, and delivered unto them his goods. Where the 10 pounds were identical, the talents are not. 5, 2, 1. To every man according to his several ability. The distribution is unequal by design, and it is calibrated to capacity, which is the first mercy in the story. Nobody is handed more than he can carry, and a talent is not a small sum. It is roughly 20 years of a laborer's wages. Even the 1-talent servant has been trusted with a fortune. 2 go to work immediately. Matthew says the first went straightway, and both double what they were given. And here is the detail that should be printed over every discussion of comparison and calling. The 5-talent man and the 2-talent man receive exactly the same commendation. word for word. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. The man who produced 10 is not praised more than the man who produced 4. Faithfulness, not volume, is what is measured, which permanently dismantles the anxiety of the person who looks at someone else's 5 talents and despairs over their own 2. And the third man buries his. His defense is identical in spirit to the servant in Luke's parable. I knew thee that thou art an hard man, and I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Fear again, and a distorted picture of the master again. He did not do a bad thing with what he was given. He did nothing with it, and Jesus treats doing nothing as the one unforgivable use of a gift. The unused talent is not neutral. It is taken and given to another. There is a phrase in the commendation worth carrying for the rest of your life. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. The reward for faithful work is not rest from the master. It is entry into his happiness. Parable 69, the sheep and the goats, Matthew 25:31-46. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. This is the last parable Jesus tells before the Passion begins, and it is the one that most consistently unsettles comfortable readers. Sheep and goats grazed together in mixed flocks all day and were separated at night, since goats tolerate cold poorly and needed shelter. The shepherd could sort them instantly and without hesitation, because although they mingled, they were never the same animal. Then the criteria, and both groups are astonished by them. The sheep are welcomed because they fed the hungry, gave drink to the thirsty, took in the stranger, clothed the naked, visited the sick and the prisoner. And their reaction is not modesty, it is genuine bewilderment. Lord, when saw we thee an hungered and fed thee? They have no memory of doing anything for him. That is the mark of the real thing. They were not building a portfolio. They fed people because people were hungry, and it never occurred to them that they were serving Christ. And it turns out they were, and the goats are equally surprised in the other direction. When saw we thee an hungered or athirst, and did not minister unto thee? Their defense is essentially that they would have helped if they had known it counted, which is precisely the disqualification. Then the line that reframes every human encounter you will ever have. Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. The king identifies himself with the hungry, the imprisoned, the sick, and the stranger, not sentimentally, but so completely that what is done to them is legally credited as done to him. Which means the person you will pass on the street tomorrow is not a distraction from serving Christ. In the accounting of the final judgment, they are the location of it. Movement 6. The parables of John, the pictures he gave of himself. Parable 70. The grain of wheat that dies. John 12-24. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone, but if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. Some Greeks have come asking to see Jesus, and it is at that moment, the first stirring of the wider world toward him, that he says his hour has come and gives this. The picture is exact botany. A seed held in the hand is intact, safe and permanently sterile. It abideth alone. That phrase is devastating in its quietness. The seed that refuses the ground keeps everything it is and produces nothing forever. Preservation and barrenness are the same condition, and a seed placed in the ground stops being a seed. Its outer shell breaks. What was a single visible object becomes something dissolved and invisible, and out of that dissolution comes a stalk carrying dozens of grains where there had been one. Jesus is speaking first about himself. This is his interpretation of his own death, not defeat, not tragedy, but agriculture. What appears to be the end of him is the mechanism by which he becomes many, and then he immediately applies it to us. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. The same law that governs his cross governs your life. There is no version of Christian fruitfulness that bypasses burial, which means that some of what you are currently experiencing as loss may not be loss at all. Something in you is in the dark, and it feels like ending, and the parable insists that the dark is where multiplication begins. Parable 71, the Good Shepherd. John 10:11-18. I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. The word translated good is kalos, which means good in the sense of beautiful, noble, genuine, the real thing as opposed to the counterfeit. And the contrast Jesus draws is with the hireling. Watch the difference. He that is an hireling, and not the shepherd, whose own the sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep, and fleeth. The hired man is not evil. He may be perfectly competent in ordinary conditions. He simply has a limit, and the limit is his own life, and the wolf is the instrument that reveals where it lies. He runs, and his running is entirely rational because the sheep are not his. Ownership is the whole difference. I know my sheep, and am known of mine. And then the claim that no shepherd on earth could make, therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life that I might take it again. No man taketh it from me, but I lay it down of myself. That is not the language of a victim. He is saying months in advance that the crucifixion is not something done to him, but something done by him. Rome would think it was executing a provincial troublemaker. He is telling you here that he is the one acting. And there is a sentence in the middle of this passage that has never stopped enlarging the church. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring. Standing in Jerusalem, he's already looking at you. Parable 72, the door of the sheep. John 10:7-9. Verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out, and find pasture. In the hill country, shepherds often kept flocks overnight in rough stone enclosures, with a single gap in the wall and no gate. The shepherd himself lay down in that gap. He was the door. Nothing came in, and nothing went out except over his body. That is the image behind the claim, and it makes the exclusivity of the statement inseparable from its tenderness. Yes, there is one door, and the door is a person lying across the opening with his own body between the flock and the dark. Then look at what he promises to those who enter, because it has three parts and we usually keep only the first. Saved, that is security. Shall go in and out, that is freedom. A sheep in a good fold is not a prisoner. It is a creature with somewhere safe to return to and find pasture. That is provision. It is fed. Security, liberty, and sustenance, all three located in the same doorway. And he contrasts it with the alternative in the next verse. The thief cometh not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. Three verbs of subtraction against a promise of abundance. Every counterfeit door in the world takes something. This one gives. Parable 73, the true vine. John 15:1-8. I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Spoken on the last night, probably walking toward Gethsemane, possibly past the great golden vine that was carved on the front of the temple as the symbol of Israel. Two operations of the gardener open the parable, and they are easily confused. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit he taketh away, and every branch that beareth fruit he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. The word rendered purgeth is kathairo, to cleanse, to prune. And note who receives it, the fruitful branch. Pruning is not punishment for failure. It is what happens to the productive. Any vine dresser will tell you that an unpruned vine produces abundant foliage and poor fruit, because the plant's energy goes into growth in every direction. Cutting is how a vine is concentrated. So if this has been a season of things being cut out of your life, consider that the knife in the hand of the husbandman is not a verdict against you. It is often the complement of the vineyard. Then the central command, given 11 times in 10 verses, abide. Remain, stay, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine. No more can ye, except ye abide in me. Notice how passive the branch's job is. It does not manufacture grapes. It does not strain. It simply maintains connection and allows sap it did not produce to pass through it into fruit. It did not design. Without me ye can do nothing is not an insult. It is a description of botany. Parable 74, the woman in travail, John 16:21-22. A woman when she is in travail hath sorrow, because her hour is come. But as soon as she is delivered of the child, she remembereth no more the anguish for joy that a man is born into the world. He is preparing 11 men for the worst 72 hours of their lives, and he chooses this image. Consider how honest it is. He does not say the pain is small or imaginary or deserved or brief. Childbirth in the ancient world was the most dangerous and most acute experience most people would ever witness. He grants the anguish completely, but he identifies 2 things about it that change everything. First, it is productive pain. It is not the pain of injury or decay. It is the pain of something being born. That distinction does not lessen the intensity by 1 degree, and it changes its meaning entirely. There is suffering that is merely destruction, and there is suffering that is labor, and from the inside they can feel identical. Second, it is bounded. Her hour is come, an hour, not an era. And on the other side is a joy so total that it does not merely outweigh the memory but reshapes it. And ye now therefore have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart shall rejoice, and your joy no man taketh from you. That last clause is the promise to hold if you are in the middle of the hour tonight. Everything you have ever had, someone could take. This joy has no such vulnerability because it is not built on a circumstance. It is built on a resurrection. Parable 75, the living water, John 4:13-14 and John 7:37-38. Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again, but whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. The 75th story ends where the whole thing has been going. He is sitting on the edge of a well at noon, tired from walking, in Samaritan territory, where a Jewish rabbi had no business being, talking to a woman who has come for water at the hottest hour of the day, precisely because nobody else will be there. She has had 5 husbands and is living with a 6th. She is the village's cautionary tale, and she has organized her life around avoiding people, and he asks her for a drink, putting himself in her debt, giving her something to give. Then he takes the object in her hands and turns it into a parable. Every well in the world requires you to come back. That is the nature of every source of satisfaction you have ever drawn from. The relief is real, and the relief is temporary, and you return to the same well with the same jar, and the walk gets longer every year. And he offers something with a different architecture, not a better well outside you, but a spring inside you. A source that does not require the walk. Later, at the Feast of Tabernacles, he stands up in the middle of the temple during the water-pouring ceremony and shouts it publicly, "If any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. He that believeth on me, as the Scripture hath said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water." not a well now, rivers, and not merely for himself, out of him flowing to others. That is the last thing to say after 75 parables. The sower ends with 100-fold. The mustard seed ends with birds nesting in branches. The wheat that dies ends with much fruit. The vine ends with more fruit. And this one ends with rivers running out of an ordinary person and into a dry world. Everything he ever said about the kingdom ends in overflow. Closing reflection. What 75 stories do to a person. We began with a number, and it is worth returning to it now that you have walked the whole way through. 75. 75 separate refusals on the part of Jesus of Nazareth to give people a definition when he could give them a doorway instead. And if you lay them all beside each other and stand back, something becomes visible that no single one of them shows on its own. Look at what he chose to build them out of. Seed, soil, weeds, mustard, yeast, treasure, pearls, nets, lamps, salt, sand, splinters, planks, fruit, birds, flowers, doctors, weddings, cloth, wineskins, thieves, houses, children playing in a square, debts, roads, oil, wine, a beast of burden, midnight bread, barns, girded robes, fig trees, dinner-seating towers, armies, sheep, coins, a father running down a road, a ledger, a beggar at a gate, a servant's supper, a widow at a courthouse, 2 men praying, buried money, camels, needles, day laborers, vineyards, cornerstones, wedding clothes, budding branches, floodwaters, vultures, millstones, doorkeepers, lamps at midnight, talents, sheep and goats, a grain of wheat, a shepherd, a doorway, a vine, a woman in labor, and a woman with an empty jar at a well. Not one temple, not one scroll, not one altar, not one priest, not one liturgy, not one theological term. He built the entire visible architecture of the kingdom of God out of the material of ordinary life. And that is not an accident of style. It is the message underneath the messages. He was telling us 75 times, in 75 different ways, that the kingdom of God is not somewhere else. It is here in the field you work, in the money you handle, in the bread you bake, in the argument you have not resolved, in the person lying at your gate, in the seat you chose at dinner, in the son who left and the son who stayed. And that is what shatters, finally, not any single parable, the cumulative weight of all of them. Because here is what you cannot do after hearing 75 of these. You cannot go on believing that faith is a compartment. You cannot go on believing that the spiritual part of your life is the hour you set aside for it. Every one of these stories reaches into the most ordinary corner of an ordinary week and says, this too. God is here as well, and this, and this. Do you feel how much that costs and how much it gives? It costs you the comfortable arrangement in which God has a room in your house and the rest of the rooms are yours. There is no parable in this entire collection that permits that arrangement. The wineskin will not hold it. The 2 masters will not allow it. The narrow gate will not admit the luggage. And what it gives you is a world with no ordinary square inch left in it. A world where the stranger in the ditch is an appointment, where the coin under the floorboards is being searched for by God himself with a lamp, where the smallest seed you have is not too small, the latest hour you arrive is not too late, the debt you owe is not too large, and the road you walk down is not too far away for a father to be watching it. Let me say a word to a few specific people before we finish. If you have come to the end of this and you recognize yourself as the younger son, you know exactly which far country, and you know exactly what it cost. And you have been rehearsing a speech about hired servants for years. Hear this again. He was yet a great way off. You do not have to arrive to be seen. He is already running. If you recognize yourself as the elder brother standing in the yard, technically flawless, quietly furious, listening to music you cannot bring yourself to enjoy, the Father came out for you too. He left the party to come and find you in the dark. That is in the text. Go in. If you are the barren fig tree, terrified that your time has run out, somebody is interceding for you. And this year of digging and difficulty may be the answer to a prayer you never heard prayed. If you are the one talent buried in the ground out of fear, the master is not who you think he is. That was the whole error. He was never harsh. He was never waiting to catch you. You buried it because you were afraid of a man who does not exist. And if you are simply tired and none of these fit, and you came here carrying that one word you typed into the comments hours ago, the water in the well runs out and he knows it. That is why he sat down beside one and offered a spring. Closing. Send this to one person. Before you go, I want to ask you for one thing, and it is not for me. Somewhere in the last few hours while you were listening, a person came to mind. Maybe more than once. Maybe you did not even mean to think of them. They simply arrived during one of these parables, at the ditch on the Jericho road, or at the father watching the road, or at the woman on her knees sweeping the floor for something she lost. You know exactly who I mean. You are thinking of them right now. Send them this video. That is my one request. Not a comment about it, not a long message explaining yourself, not a careful preamble about why you thought of them. Just send it. Say, "This made me think of you," or say nothing at all. You do not know which of these 75 stories is the one that has their name on it, but the God who told them does. And he has been arranging that person's ache for a long time, and he may well have brought you here today primarily so that you would be the one holding the link. That is what a share is. It is not promotion. It is a quiet act of love toward one soul, done by someone who will probably never get to see what it did. The Samaritan paid the innkeeper and left. He never came back to check on the outcome in the story. He just paid and walked on. And then, if you would, and only after you have sent it, subscribe to the channel. It is free, it takes one tap, and it simply means that when the next teaching comes, it finds you instead of missing you. That is all it does. But it is how you keep your seat here. One last thing before the blessing. In the comments, tell me which one landed. Out of all 75, which parable, which line, which single verse was the one you most needed to hear today? Just name it. Someone scrolling past tomorrow, at the end of a very bad night, is going to read your comment and go looking for that exact story, and they will find it because you named it. Your one sentence becomes a signpost for a stranger. And now, receive this. May the God who scatters seed on every kind of ground scatter his word into the hard, packed places of your life, and may he break the path open until it receives him. May the smallest thing you have, the mustard grain of faith you are almost embarrassed by tonight, grow into something the birds of the air can shelter in. May you be found by the shepherd who counts to 99 and refuses to stop there. And may you know when he lifts you that he is rejoicing and not scolding. May the debt you cannot repay be cancelled in full, and may you never again take a brother by the throat over 100 pence. May the pruning in your life turn out to be the vineyard's compliment and not its rejection. May you abide, and may the fruit come without your striving. And may you never again walk past a person at your gate or a stranger in a ditch without recognizing that you have just been given an appointment with the King. Go in the peace of the one who told these stories. He is still telling them. He is still standing up in the middle of the noise and shouting the invitation over the crowd. If any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. Come and drink. And then go and be a river. God bless you wherever in the world you are, whatever hour it is where you are sitting. I will see you in the next teaching. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear. Matthew 13:9. The kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure hid in a field, the which when a man hath found, he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and buyeth that field. Matthew 13:44. Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Matthew 25:40.